Good evening. The planning board meeting on Tuesday, October 3rd will come to order. Rebecca, is there anything that is not being addressed tonight?
Everything will be heard tonight.
Everything will be heard tonight. That's very exciting. Okay, so we'll be on to the first thing, the bond release.
So this is the bond release for 101-115 Sutton Hill Road. It's called the Capstone subdivision, and it is to release the site opening bond of $5,000 and the roadway bond of $2,500. The applicant has provided an as-built and has also provided the certification letter and all the other documents required for bond release.
So what is your recommendation about how much we should release?
Would be to release it in its full amount.
The remaining bond amount for the site opening
And the roadway.
And the roadway. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to release the bond?
Make a motion to release the bond for Capstone, 101-115 Sutton Hill Road
Okay, for the site opening and...
for site opening and
Site opening and roadway bond.
roadway bond.
Okay.
Yes.
Motion made and seconded.
I'll second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you, folks.
Yep. Okay. Ooh, an A&R. That's exciting. 67 Riverview.
So this, I'm first going to display a locus so that you'll get a better view of where the actual property is located. It's on River Street where you see the cursor over here. That's where the Merrimack River is. And I will
Doesn't
now
look like the river.
display the plan. And the applicant is essentially trying to create a not buildable lot. That would be this lot right here, B1. The lot does not meet the dimensional requirements. He has labeled it not a buildable lot per the requirements of the approval not required in the subdivision control laws. And the applicant is here to explain or answer any questions you have about his intent with this property.
That would be great.
My name is Sean Ferris. I'm the owner of 67 Riverview Street, and I'm looking to A&R the lot where you see Lot A and Lot B. It has all the correct frontage in the area. I'm looking to take Lot B1 and join it with 71 Riverview Street. And
But not at this point in time, however.
not at this point in time, just going to separate it right now. I'm going to be coming back probably in January to the board, taking 71 Riverview Street and subdividing that and make it more conforming where it has 100 feet of frontage as is required and a 12,500 square feet that it would need. And we'll be taking the front portion on over to the Merrimack River and separating that along with 73 Riverview Street, and that front portion will be separated too, and we're hoping to actually build a trail, for the trails in North Andover, a continuation along the Merrimack River.
What's on the property now?
On 67, there is an existing garage and a house. Single family, it's a rental
A little
property.
bigger.
And
Oh, sorry.
it will be,
This is the locus. That's 73 right there. This is the house he was just referring to. There's the house on 71, and this is lot, 67. So those are the three lots in question.
Okay, can you go back to the,
So what's the big picture? What's this going to be in the end?
the big picture, 67, 71, and 73 will no longer be rental properties, which I rent out and control. They'll be regular homes for the people. So we'll eliminate the rental properties and subdividing the front piece where the road is actually complete dead end. We're going to be extending it with a turnaround. We talked to the fire department what they're requiring. We're looking to do like a hammerhead or some kind of a better safety way. Right now, people tend to turn around in 73 on the property over the years, or they'll turn into the 71 driveway to turn around. Right now, it's just a dead end.
Okay, so if we're looking at this is, so there's 67,
This
got
is,
71,
this is 71,
and where is 73?
73 is over here.
It's over here.
Okay, so the lot that's being subdivided is which lot?
67.
67, this one right here.
So what you're doing is you're making it smaller, but creating lot B1?
We're bringing it down, it'll still be, 67 will still be in the zone RA for a minimum 12,500 square feet. We'll be given part of the frontage on the lot B on the left side of lot A, so it will have more of a frontage. So when we subdivide it, it'll have 12,500.
So you have B1, and what's B1 going to be combined with?
B1's going to be combined with number 71. And where you see
Wait
it,
a second, how can that be? How can you combine B1 with 71 if 67's in between? Am I missing something?
no, we're just taking the back strip. And if you look at the back strip, if you go down Charles Street, all the properties down there, 71.
Oh, wait a second, you're saying 71 in the back. Okay.
Right. So
What's the width there?
that's 6 feet wide. And we're going to be coming back with plans for, right now, it has a 4-foot fence on 67, and 71 has a 8-foot fence. We want a uniform fence going all the way along the backside because you have the train behind it. And if you go down Charles Street, they all have different fences, and so when the same ownership, different ownership comes in place, everyone's going to have the fence that looks uniform and nice. And right now, we're looking at, we really want to do a sound barrier fence because the houses are so close to the train, you get the vibration, the noise from blowing. So we're looking at the expenses on that.
So B1 is V, right? It's the way you're
B-
proposing.
Yeah.
I think we weren't clear that goes all the way across.
Just to help create the area for 71, so we can subdivide the frontage. And the frontage over there in 71, you really couldn't build on that side because of the riverfront, the wetlands, and across where it says roadway easement, right next to that is a garage, which is actually in the wetlands, in the flood zone, and all this, and that garage will be coming down.
And this leaves Lot A with still enough frontage?
Yep, it has all the required frontage setbacks and everything.
So, I feel like there's another foot going to drop on this. Why would you do this? I mean, are you going
Because-
to, in the end, build any more houses here beyond what's there now?
Yeah, further down in 73 we can.
Well, 73 is on the other side.
Right.
But you
But
can't
like-
do it now because you don't have, is Riverview Street of sufficient width, grade, and construction that meets our standards?
It's been accepted as 22 feet laid out on a plan.
But how far down?
Not all the way down.
Right down where it says the roadway easement,
To that point, to that point.
right
But
there.
beyond that, it
Beyond
can't.
that, it's
It
not.
can't.
So
So-
73 is not, you can't subdivide 73 because it's not on a...
Unless we build a road, which,
Unless you build a road, right.
Exactly.
And that means you have to come back to the planning board.
yes, and that's our intentions.
So what does this B1 have to do with that? I guess
We'll be creating an area for 71, so when we subdivide 71, we can release everything on the left side of the road.
But he can't combine it at this point in time because he does not have the appropriate frontage.
Well, yeah, but I mean, are you going to combine B1 with 71?
Yes.
What's the frontage? Yeah, but it's only 8 feet wide. You can't, I mean,
6
I
feet
think
wide.
you're going to end up with a ragtail lot, one of the ones that we said is not going to be conforming.
Right now, it is not conforming.
It's not, but if you combine 71 with B1, how many square feet are in 71?
71 is like 6,300 square feet,
And how much is B1?
and B1 is 4,356.
So you don't the combination of the two of them is not the minimum lot size.
But we will, because we're gonna do a lot line adjustment from 73.
So, but,
73 is gonna give the required area it needs.
so, 70, how big is 73?
Acre and a half?
See, here's the thing. You got to come to us with your full proposal, not
Right.
with it piecemeal, because I feel like you're not telling us the full story, frankly, and that you'll come back and say, well, look, I had to do it this way because this is what I've got. I think you'd be better served to come in once with your whole plan and not with it being piecemeal.
Can't do that.
Why?
Because the engineers and the lawyers cost a lot of money, so we're selling off 67 so we can move forward.
Selling off 60.
So he's trying to sell Lot A. And he's
The
trying
house
to
that's
take
there now,
piece of
it's a
that.
rental, it's gonna be sold. The proceeds will have it to move forward.
I mean, to me, if it meets the requirements of an A&R, then it does, but
Well, see,
I'm also skeptical.
I'm not so sure that 71 is going to be legally conforming when 71 becomes added to B1 and added to something else. I don't think
Yeah, but
that
if we-
meets the requirement of our,
Frontage,
no, it's the shape. It's that, what you're doing is you're creating sort of a thing that, you know,
we're
where is,
creating more area opposed to right now it has area on the riverfront, and we're trying to eliminate that.
where's the riverfront again?
So I can pull out the locus so that you can see.
Yeah,
this.
can we see that on this?
So the riverfront's over here. The lot he's talking about with the easement is right here. So the lot actually extends up to the water. And that's where that roadway ends and that easement begins, and that's the 73. he's
So
looking
you're
to
saying
build on.
the 73 goes right up to the water?
It goes
Yes,
up, down,
73 and
up.
71.
71 goes up to the water too?
Yes, it does, sir.
The lot is right here.
Well, no, I'm totally confused. Go back to the other one.
Does 67 go to the water?
No.
See, 71, the street, I think, confuses the matter. You just kind of assume that that's a boundary, but it's not. It continues to the river.
Well, wait a second.
There
If
you
the
go.
street's a public way, it's a public way. So it's got to be a separate, it may be in common ownership, but it's not part of the house at 71. It can't be.
What's that, the,
road, no,
The road and if it's a public way, then how can you, what's the
but
dimension?
the public way ends,
Space at the end.
yeah, there's a space at the end.
Yeah,
That's an easement.
this roadway easement, is that part of the lot?
Yes, it is for 71.
You didn't tell us that.
I'm sorry.
Geez, I got to tell you, if you don't come in with your full plan, why can't you propose your full plan now?
Because we're not ready, and it costs a lot of money for engineers and,
Well, yeah, but here's part of the problem is there's no strong likelihood that you're going to get this approved.
That's
Because
right.
it could be in the floodplain or something like that. I don't want to lead you down the wrong path.
Right.
Because I remember probably 10, 15 years ago, something on this lot came up and we didn't approve it.
Right.
Because we didn't trust what was going to go on. So I don't want to lead you
So-
down a primrose path
so
on
the-
this thing. I got to tell
the
you.
reason why it didn't get approved is the roadway easement that's there wasn't there. They had no rights for utilities or anything to extend that
Well,
road.
when did the easement get established?
December of last year, I hold personally the easement that I'm gonna turn over to the town. And that's the book and page number.
Okay.
So,
and, I'm sorry, you're gonna build out the road there?
yes,
So would that cut the
And
lot in
even-
half? No, but just would that cut the lot in half?
yeah, we're gonna subdivide. We're gonna take where it says roadway easement, we're gonna
Yeah.
grant that to the town.
So then a lot here and a lot above?
Right, and the lot above going to the water, it's gonna be separate. It is part of the flood zone. It is in the Riverfront Protection Act. You're limited what you can do. It's a beautiful piece of land. And we would like to extend from, Conservation holds across the street from 67. They have that other parcel, and they already had approved in 1991 for a boat ramp, for a town boat ramp there. And I've talked to the lady from Conservation in regards to that I want to be able to extend if they would do it. And they said they're up for it, is the only between Riverview Street from the town conservation land to the 71 and 73. Besides that, there's no other access. If you have a river walk, or like a walkway there, you can go all the way up to Osgood Landing. And these two properties basically hold the key to it. And that's why I'm here, and this is what I want to do.
So this piece would be town access to the water?
Yeah,
Public
for
access
a
to the
path.
water? For a path?
Yeah.
But not for the boats?
Well, they have it on, it's been approved in 1991 or 99, right across the street from 67. They hold that land there. So they haven't acted on it. It's been approved. They haven't acted on it.
How long have you owned this property?
67 since April, and 73, I managed that as well. 67, 73, and 71, John and Deborah Conn, my sister and brother-in-law, owned the one in the middle.
Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you have a very incomplete presentation, and what I'm worried about is that you do something that may put you in a worse position down the road, and I don't understand completely what you're trying to do.
I'm trying to create the area for what 71 is going to need to subdivide.
But
to
how
have-
many lots are you going to try to build there?
Well, there's only 2 lots right there. And how many lots we can get on 73, it all depends. If, you still have to have the 12,500 square feet
Right.
area. You got to stay away from the river frontage, the 200 foot. You have the flood zone. You're limited. What could possibly go in there is probably 2 more house lots, and that's it. But the benefit what the town might get out of it, what should get out of it, is not only a walkway, pathway, but a better road for a turnaround. Right now, there's no turnaround.
So 2 more houses in addition to 73?
Yeah, if the
So right
road,
now 73 has 1 house.
if we
and you
design
think
the
you can get
road
3?
to come around for a turnaround, then we might have potential to put in 2 more houses.
So, I mean, I know I started the questions about what it's going to eventually be, but to be honest, that's not really in front of us right now. I mean, I agree that I have a lot of concerns that you're going to be able to do what you want to do, especially with the shape of the lot, but to me, that's your risk, not
Exactly.
ours. So I see frontage, I see that there seems to be access. It seems to me that the standards, at least for an A&R for this, are met. It says it's not buildable. So my vote would be to grant the A&R, but again,
Yeah, we're going to be
with a
coming,
healthy
we will.
dose of skepticism
we're
as to
go-
what you can
yeah,
do later
we're going to
on.
be coming back in
Yeah, I
January.
mean, carving off that lot B1 the way you've done it is, I think it's going to put you in a fair amount of risk. There were other ways I would split that up other than
Well-
that, but if you want to do it that way and
Well,
live
there's
with the
no other ways.
consequences of
You
that.
really don't want to take much of a backyard from, you're talking from 67. You want them to have a nice backyard, opposed to chopping it, making it wider. On the left where it says B1, that's the culvert, that's like a river, a little stream runs through there, so it has little to no value. You can't touch it, it's in the flood zone. It's been
Okay.
flagged for wetlands, it has nothing you could do to it.
Okay, is there any wetlands on any of these properties?
Yeah, on 70, on 71 and 73, there's wetlands.
Okay. But there's on this part,
Right, and over there, there's some wetlands, yeah, where that little stream runs through.
okay. Okay, I mean, I agree with A10 that, you know, if in the end that's what you want to do with this, I think you can do it. It's, and I would change the label on not a separate building lot and say it's not a buildable lot.
Well, because if we come back and we want an 8-foot fence, now you need a building permit for an 8-foot fence. You wouldn't be able to have an 8-foot fence. And my engineer from Peter Ogren from Hayes Engineering said this is how you do it, and I wouldn't change it any other way. His 43 years of being an engineer, and he's done, I think.
Well, it's not a buildable
Yeah.
lot in terms of being able to construct
Right.
a structure on it. That's
Well,
that's
because
what we're saying.
saying it's not a separate building lot, it's going to be merged in January with 71.
But it might be, but you haven't done that yet.
Right.
Yeah,
So as it currently exists, it's is not be a separate buildable lot. You
Yeah, I don't
because
know what not a separate building lot means.
That's what it's referred to in the language of the A&R, of the regulations itself. It
Okay.
listed as a separate building lot.
Okay,
That's how it's actually labeled.
Right.
okay.
And
Okay.
he said he couldn't change it any other way. He wouldn't put a stamp on it, the engineer. Because he
Okay.
says there's legal issues that come out of this down the road, and he's been, had dealt that, and I think,
Okay. Is everybody then okay with what exactly they're trying to do with this specific lot? I do think that the, you should have a notion that what the old lot was. Did the old lot have a number? What it ought to be is that the old lot, whatever it is, should be equal to Lot A plus B1. And you don't have any, you can't really tell from this what the old lot line was.
So that would be the only recommendation of the staff, is that the plan be updated as we do in our other A&Rs, to have the dash line showing the proposed lot line from the original lot line.
The original lot line, yeah. Yeah. So, everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, again, I suggest you just double check and look through the ordinances and the.
is it required to show the old lot line when you're creating a new lot line?
Typically, that's how we present the A&Rs. There's usually a dashed or italicized type line that differentiates where the new lot is going and where the old lot stood, so that people can get a better distinction of what's currently there.
But the old lot line's on file, recorded at the plan.
It's just a dash, it's just that your engineer would go and he'd put a dash line where this solid line is all the way through, so that people would understand that that is what you're carving out, and the original lot was over here.
It's what we do in every single one.
It's just more
Okay.
of a formality, it's not
Okay,
to
that-
say,
So you just want him to show where the old lot line was?
yes, and he'll know exactly what I'm talking
Okay.
about, and I can talk to Peter Ogren for you if you
Yep.
like.
And, yeah, so I think we'll be okay with this, but don't presume that this is,
Right.
your next step's gonna be a lot tougher.
I know it's gonna be a lot tougher, and I think this is the
There are a lot more
right-
challenges just because of where you're building, and it really has very little to do with us, it has to do with what the rules are.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so would somebody like to make a motion to direct staff to sign the Form A when it's in good order?
I would make a motion that the planning staff sign Form A, approval not required, 67 Riverview for the plan, with the understanding that it'll be amended as discussed to show the old lot line and the plan as presented tonight.
For a second?
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
So I should bring you the new plans back?
yeah.
Bring it-
And when can I expect to get that signed?
You can bring it to the planning department and they'll
Yep,
take
just,
care of it.
we'll give me a call tomorrow, and
All right.
we'll go through the details.
Thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to seeing you in January.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, moving right along to the public hearings, 0 Great Pond Road.
This is for the solar project that is proposed on Brook School property across the street from the actual campus. Everything has been completed in terms of stormwater review, and the fire department has signed off on the access. They had decided to increase the width at the end so that they can have more of an adequate turnaround. The applicant has complied with all of the requirements that have been asked of them so far, and the building commissioner has officially provided a determination on the matter stating that it is an allowed use by right under Section 3 of Mass General Law 40A in terms of educational use. So there's no further matters that the planning staff has. However, if there's any other questions, we can address them, and there is a decision drafted if you'd like to move forward.
Okay, the question that I had was they're building on some steep slopes.
Yes, and we did have those reviewed by the stormwater consultant, and they did say that they met the standards of the bylaw in terms of the ratio.
Okay, so what was the steepest slope?
I believe Ben from Nexamp can point out the steepest one, but I believe,
Okay, so the steepest area is generally in the northeastern corner of the array. I don't have the slope percentage in front of me, but that should be in the letter that the consultant provided.
I'm trying to pull up the email right now from the consultant. The existing slopes are less than 3.1.
Okay. So now the other question that I had is that this should be a taxable property.
There is going to be, and I believe negotiations have started with the town manager in terms of a pilot agreement. I don't know if Ben wants to speak towards that.
Sure. So we're in negotiations with the town administrator to put together a pilot agreement for this, a payment in lieu of taxes agreement to cover personal property taxes payable by the project. This is that requires authorization at town meeting, and we received that. It was in front of town meeting about 1.5 years ago. So we have authorization at this point for the town manager to negotiate and enter into this agreement, which would provide tax revenue to the town.
So are you going to end up paying what you would have paid for real estate taxes on this property, given that it's not a private use, it's a commercial use, because we know, and you've said this, that you can't get the tax credit unless it's owned by a profit-making entity.
Correct.
So is the town going to get the equivalent of what they would have gotten if it was a commercial entity?
The town will get the equivalent of what it would get for a solar project. Basically, the solar project will pay personal property taxes. Whether or not this affects the underlying tax exemption of the land is a question for the assessors. And I don't have a legal opinion on that, but we believe that solar projects are typically taxed as personal property, not real estate. And so we're entering into a pilot agreement to cover all of those payments.
Is that typically what happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So solar projects are cost a lot up front and then depreciate fairly quickly. So we enter into a pilot to basically smooth out the payments over the life of the project, so that the town knows exactly what they're getting in payments, and we can take it to a bank and finance it essentially.
Okay. And the other question that I have back to the sort of the first question I had is that you're building on probably the steepest slopes on the property. And did you look at taking the building off of the steep slopes and putting it at the area that's more level?
Sure. The reason that the project is located where it is, Rebecca, if you could pull up the map, was to stay out of the groundwater districts. So there are a couple restrictions on the property. There's the wetland buffer zone, to the east of the, north is to the left when you're looking at this. So to the east, there are wetlands, and then to the south, there is the water protection overlay district. So we were
Okay.
trying to stay out of that. And then the Conservation Commission permit that we, the project received.
So where's the wetland buffer and where is the,
The dotted blue line is the wetland, or is the water protection, watershed protection overlay
And that
district.
Was confirmed by Lisa back in 2013, and TEC also agrees that that is the correct line. And the reason for keeping it out, they had stated, was in order to comply with the Mass DEP Zone A and discharge into the watershed.
okay, I get that. So why, you notice how the ones on the one side are much shorter than the ones on the other side?
Yeah, and that's based on, the trees are very tall, right along Great Pond Road, and that was a shading consideration, not shifting the array further to the west, because we're building basically right up to the shading line of those trees.
Okay. Okay. You're really gonna go into, I mean, I think you're gonna have erosion problems. What happens if you do?
I mean, we're under the Conservation Commission permit and have to meet all applicable state and local stormwater and erosion control requirements. Certainly, if there's an issue, we'll fix it. But we are committed to not creating an erosion problem on this site. And I believe.
Yeah, I
the
mean,
project
how
has been
many acres
designed.
of trees are you taking down?
I believe Rebecca, do you have the number? It was in the plans. I believe it's about 3.
Okay.
Since the project itself is about 5 acres, but part of it is open as well.
Okay. And there's no way you can squeeze any more to the left from the right?
No, we're already kind of pushing up against the shading there, and also we have to stay both shading and tree fall distance away from all other trees, and we didn't want to take down any of the trees that were existing along Great Pond Road, to hide the project essentially from sight. Taking down those trees would
Okay, yeah,
greatly
fair
increase
enough.
the impact of this project.
Okay. Thank you guys all for indulging me. Does anybody else have any questions?
No?
Okay. Does somebody want to make a motion to close the public hearing for this?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing for the 0 Great Pond Road and 1193 Great Pond Road, North Andover Solar LLC.
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's look at the decision. We have 1 permit or 2 permits on this one?
Just one.
It's a land disturbance permit?
Correct.
You really don't have a, that's probably the thing we ought to do, for these kinds of things, in the same way that, at some point in time, we should have more of a bylaw that deals with these as structures.
I believe
Yeah.
Gene Enright had been working on something originally, but there was no real discussion of it. But
Yeah.
now that it becomes more prevalent, I believe that we should
Yeah, I
definitely
mean, I
pursue
think we've
that.
run into, it's not just these things, it can be any different type. I mean,
Yes.
even when we had the issue of the lights at Brooks, remember, we said, yeah, maybe that should be something that's
Yes.
subject to a permit.
No, definitely.
And where I work in Beverly, we have one that's being proposed right now, so.
Yeah,
Steal some of that. share
yeah,
some
maybe,
notes and some
no harm in
thoughts.
that, that'd be
And
excellent.
at least a place to look at a template.
Yeah. Okay.
The order of conditions, that's through the end of 2018 or through, when is that good through? It says in here, number 5 was extended for the year 2018. I'm just wondering if we have a,
It was extended 1 year from when they asked for the extension, which was in this year.
Sometime this summer, I could look at it.
So they have until 2018, and I believe they actually have the ability to request one more extension. Correct, or is that?
This was the last extension,
Okay.
so we'll have to start work by the time that it was issued.
and you don't think that's going to be a problem, correct?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
And number 5, the finding of facts, was the Conservation Commission really 2013?
Yes.
It was.
And our original administrative approval was also within the same year.
Just to give you the background here, Brooks had a different solar company originally under contract for this project. They got the project through both Conservation Commission and the Planning Board, got it fully approved and never built it. It took Brooks School a while to get out of the permit, to get out of their contract with them, and then when they did, they went back out to bid. This permit, Planning Board permit, had expired, but the Conservation Commission permit was still in place, and so we were able to extend that, keep that alive, and then just have to come back to renew this one, or reapply for this one.
So given the concern over erosion, could be a condition of some sort?
Do we have any do we have anything in here about the monitor and, review of the site and that sort of thing that we typically have for a lot of projects?
Yes, we do. Condition number 18, prior to the start of any construction and/or site work, the applicant shall designate an independent environmental monitor. This is only during the actual construction and site work, so if you wanted to do another condition that extended that beyond that.
Yeah, I think what we ought to do is extend it beyond it also, even a little bit more in terms of the revegetation, and that maybe they have to come back to us for a couple of years with how the revegetation is going.
So would you say something quarterly, or?
Yeah, semi-annually is fine.
I'm looking at the number 14, discontinuance and abandonment. They have 180 days to remove it if it's abandoned. Is that standard, 180 days? It seems like a lot of time to me. I'm just wondering if that's...
Well, I had gone back and forth with Ben in regards to trying to figure out exactly what we would have for a discontinuance and abandonment type of provision, since we don't really have a bylaw right now that states any specific language for something like that. And whereas this is a different type of situation where some of the other solar projects we've seen. So we were going back and forth, and I had provided a smaller number, but then Ben had mentioned that there was, in terms of taking down the equipment, or maybe he can explain better as to why he had provided an increase in what was originally provided.
Sure, and it was mostly based around, wanting to ensure, like 180 days is is a number that we've seen in a lot of communities in Massachusetts. It's also, we want to make sure that the weather conditions are right for taking this. If the project is discontinued at some point in the winter, we want to make sure that we have enough time for the snow to melt, for to ensure that we aren't, demoing a project in the middle of the winter is just what we want to avoid. So we're trying to give ourselves enough time so that we don't put ourselves in that situation.
But then why have the, provided that such a 180-day term begins or ends within the months of December, January, February, March, or April, extend to the next January, July 31st? I mean, if you're going to give yourselves 180 days because of winter, okay?
Yeah.
So if something happens in November, why not? It seems like 180 days would then cover it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, we're flexible on this.
we're
trying to.
I haven't seen this. I'm just trying to think it out.
Sure. Yeah. No, and that's fair. And we're not expecting it to take this long. We just want, given the question of do you want more time or less time to make sure that you get everything right, we just, prefer to err on the side of caution to make sure that we can comply with it. But it shouldn't take 180 days to demo this project. It only takes about 2 or 3 months to build it.
Right.
So, we can certainly tighten that up a bit.
Okay.
Would you like to do that? To decrease the 180?
I mean, my thought would just, I mean, if,
Make it 180
just make it
days.
180,
Should be
leave that
fine.
flat, and with the understanding that, obviously if it's a nuisance, it's gonna have to be cleared up before that
Sure.
based on just, general bylaws and state law.
Yeah.
And otherwise, let's just have the flat 180 would be my suggestion.
That's fine.
The thing that we talked about the pilot agreement, is that in here anywhere?
I did not mention the pilot
Okay.
agreement. I
Let's put
can,
that in
I
as a
didn't know since
condition.
it was
As a
not
condition.
finalized yet or negotiated,
just-
but I can
yeah.
mention it in a finding of fact.
No, something has to be done before they can start. Yeah,
Okay.
has to be done.
Right, not what the agreement is, but just that there will be a pilot
There
agreement.
will be, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is it common on something like this that there's periodic inspections? I just don't know. I mean, if there's,
Periodic inspections in
probably
terms of,
not, as I think about it, there shouldn't be any difference with the other kind of structure.
I mean, we do the independent monitoring during the actual
Yeah.
construction period. If
This
we
is-
extended
no,
that,
this
they'll
is
be
the-
there to make sure that
Yeah,
there's no,
that's fine. We shouldn't treat this differently than anything else, so, okay. Somebody like to make a motion to approve the land disturbance permit as amended this evening?
I'll make a motion to approve the land disturbance permit as amended this evening on 0 Great Pond Road and 1193 Great Pond Road, North Andover Solar LLC.
Okay, second? Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Moving right along. 122 Foster Street, Varsity Wireless.
so there's no real administrative updates. If the applicant wants to come up and speak towards the balloon test, or if any other board members
That would
want
be a good idea. Let's see, you and I and Tim were out there. Did you go by?
I did, but I got there a little bit, like 8:30, and everyone except the photographer was gone.
Oh, okay.
And I never found the balloon, which I took to mean that it's very visible.
You didn't have a slate of keys in your car looking for it.
Yeah,
It was a big red balloon.
yeah, we
I
saw the
couldn't find a
balloon.
place to pull over, so I went back and forth in my car, and from the road, at least, couldn't see it.
Yeah, well, it's actually narrow for the road, because I went on my way home, we left, we parked right on the other side of the street
Oh,
from the house.
Yeah.
And when I went down to, what's the first street there, Bridges Lane, I turned in. The problem was you had the houses there and some of the hills, so you just
Right.
couldn't see because it wasn't open. I suppose there were some spots, but you couldn't really see it from there, so, I don't know if you sort of on your way home, you stopped or.
My kids were, Dunkin' Donuts, so.
Yeah,
On that, but I mean, it was interesting, I thought, because there were times based on where you stood where it was clear and you're like, wow, that balloon is really much higher than the rest of the trees. And then if you stood 10 feet over it, you couldn't see it at all. So I thought it was interesting. So I just thought it was an interesting
Yeah.
experience to see.
yeah, so,
and they did provide the photos and the simulation from that, which was included in your packet.
okay. So if you could give us the short story maybe of what you think, what we saw.
Just
And-
for the record, quickly, Brian Grossman, Anderson and Krieger, outside counsel to Varsity, the applicant. With me is Chris Swarnowski from McLean Middleton, who is counsel to Verizon Wireless. We do have a couple other members of the project team here if you have questions for them. As we've noted, we had the balloon test, to the extent the board was able to get on site. If you have any questions, either from the balloon test or the sidewalk, we're happy to address those. We did provide the photographic simulations and the view shed analysis. It includes a map that shows where the photo locations were taken from. The map also includes...
Yeah, maybe if we could run through some of those and see actually with what the pictures showed, that would be helpful. And
Sure,
put
happy
it in
to.
full context for the audience here and people watching on TV.
So the first page is really just an overview. The blue demonstrates the locations where they drove. So you've been understanding it really where they went in terms of trying to identify locations that the balloon was visible from. We did have, as you noted, a couple locations that the board had asked for photographs from, so we made sure to get those photographs, including it's number 15 up there at the top left corner. But going on, I think the vision really shows a couple things. The board's discussion kind of shows it, which is there are a number of locations, certainly closer up, where there is a lot of difficulty seeing it. So the first slide is existing. It shows, you can see the balloon faintly from about 160 Foster Street. And then the second, you can see in the simulation, given the trees there, it really disguises it actually fairly well. The next slide, again, is the existing and then the proposed simulation from 100 Foster Street. Again, you can see the balloon in the existing, and then just kind of faintly the tree there in the background. Moving on to 1004 Salem Street. Again, you have the existing and then proposed. Actually, I think the existing the balloon isn't visible from that location. And then at 46 to 160, again, you can see the balloon kind of there in the background. And then, one of the reasons we chose the monopine design was really getting this view from a number of different locations where you have a bunch of trees in the foreground and then the monopine in the background, and actually, it looks in terms of height and camouflage blends in fairly well. Where you get to have a relative term better views, meaning it is more visible, is when you get further away from the site. And you can certainly see that. This is from the ball field. You go to the next one. It's one of the more pronounced views.
That's a big tree.
Where we have the more pronounced views, what you do have though is some distance. So in terms of helping to minimize visibility, no, there'll be no lighting at all on the tower.
Is that actually the case? There's no lighting required with I know the airport's quite a ways away, but
Right.
given how much higher this is above the rest of the terrain, there's still no lighting required?
Correct. And we have run the FAA on that.
Yeah.
It was included in the original package.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, that view looks pretty awful.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, I think overall, that's probably one of the more impactful views, and then is there are a couple where, again, there's greater visibility, but it's from a significantly further distance, like from Blue Ridge. But really around the site, other than that view, as you go up and down Foster Street, as you look at, the areas around it, it does blend very well, in terms of camouflage, in terms of overall general limited visibility. This is from a site location perspective, from some of the other ones that we've seen, certainly much more minimal in terms of impact than some other proposals. A number of locations where it's noted up in the upper right-hand corner that it's not visible.
This one's pretty visible.
Again, and this is one that has some, more heightened visibility in terms of overall view of the tower, but again, it's in terms of distance significant.
That's the one up on Bear Hill?
Yes. Yeah, it's actually taken from Huckleberry Land.
we're just seeing the existing on a lot of these. Where are we seeing
Well, there's no balloon visible. from
Yeah,
the site.
so in some they took,
oh, I see.
yeah, where it's not visible, they've just given us the existing, but they've noted that it's not visible. Actually,
This one,
I
just
think,
kinda, you can see the balloon back there a little bit.
Oh, is that
It's really
it?
faint.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
That's where the
Where's
simulation-
that?
that's from Blue Ridge Road.
Right off Bear Hill.
Yeah, I'm sorry, when you asked if that's Bear Hill, I thought we were at the final slide. So the one you asked about originally was from Huckleberry Lane. I said overall, I think the monopine helps accomplish what it certainly as you're nearer to the site, what it's meant to do in terms of camouflage, and as you get much further away from the site, there's some additional visibility, but it's mitigated by distance.
It's a big tree.
Go back to the soccer field one now. I know that's not picking up that side. I agree with you, the up close, it does blend in. That looks terrible.
I mean, overall, we chose the monopine design because it, blends generally with, the background, but I mean, we would certainly do a standard monopole if somebody
Well,
thought
I'm
that
not
that was
saying that would look any
a
better.
better idea.
Yeah.
To have it just look at, like what it is, but, yeah, obviously it's probably the most significant view, but, overall, in terms of general impact on the surrounding area, it's very, very limited.
So, okay, where do you stand with the ZBA?
We have our first meeting with the ZBA next Tuesday, on the 10th.
Okay.
Were you able to do a comparison with the number of telephone pole top antennas that would give you the same coverage for the residences?
Yeah, I talked to our radio frequency engineers about that. And you may recall, as we explained last time, it's sort of an estimate and it's theoretical. Of course, when I raise the issue with them, the first response is a sigh, and then they say, you know it can't be done. I do know it can't be done, but I want to explain why as good as possible. And a good way to think about it is maybe think of painting a door with a nail polish brush. Can theoretically be done. Is it the right way? No. So when we started sort of breaking down the analysis, we think that these small cells cover approximately, they can reach about 1/3 of a mile. And again, this depends on several things. You can move it up or down a little bit, you have obstructions and things like that, but for estimate purposes, we say approximately 1/3 of a mile. The proposed tower is covering an area of about 15 square miles. So the number, starting out, about 45. Now, there are a whole bunch of other factors to consider. Do we have 45 poles there? I don't know. It's a large endeavor to even look for those 45 poles. Then the next question becomes, do we have the ability to run fiber optic cable to those 45 poles? Theoretically, yes. That may become a major infrastructure project if we go to do that. So these are the things that sort of rule it out in our mind as a viable alternative. Lastly, and maybe more significantly, the pole top antennas that we had done last summer, and as we explained, address these sort of dense pockets of need, they operate on one specific frequency, and it's a frequency that we're going to be using for the anticipated 5G deployment in the future. Those antennas do not cover our lower frequency band that is still our primary band. And the reason for that is, as we explained last summer, the pole top attachments are really fillers, if you will, where there's an increased and intensified demand for the service. If you go back to sort of the analogy I was using with painting a door with a nail polish brush, well, if there's a chip in the door that you want to fill in, actually the nail polish brush works pretty well for that. And that's really what the pole top attachments are doing. They're hitting that specific area of heightened or increased demand. So when you take into account all of those things, it becomes pretty clear that doing it with the pole top antennas is really impractical, even if it may theoretically be possible.
On top of that, a couple other things. You have issues around pole availability. I don't do it for Verizon, but I do work with one of my clients as a small cell provider. So you have, if it has a transformer on it, not an option. If it has a primary riser on it, it's not an option. If it has certain other issues with it, it's not necessarily an option. As we've seen, really through the view shed, there are significantly tall trees next to the utility poles. That impacts propagation. You have to engage in a lot of tree trimming and perhaps to even mount the antennas. I would also note that and he was here last time, we don't see David tonight, in the consultant's initial report, on your independent consultant's initial report to the board on this question, said, quoting from him, the typical approach in network design is to use these small cells is to have general overall coverage from macro cell sites, with the small cells filling in areas of small coverage gaps or with high capacity demands. That's kind of what Chris has already described. And his next conclusion is there does not appear to be a practical way to simply add more and more nodes to utility poles to provide the macro scale coverage that Verizon seeks from the new tower facility. So even your consultant's already taken a look at this and agrees with this conclusion.
So how many different sites how did you decide on the site that you actually chose?
Sure. So we have, Stephen Kelleher is the site development director for Varsity. He's the one who goes out and reviews the ordinance to take a look and see where things are permitted, reviews things like tax maps, reviews obviously the zoning ordinance and the zoning map to try and determine where a facility could be located. He has to personally visit the area as well as using all the tools that are now available to us through like Google Earth and satellite maps and things like that to look and try and identify locations that might be viable, and then he goes out, contacts landlords to see if there's potential interest. We did catalog all of that in the initial application filing. And we did submit a list of all the different locations that he did look at. So there was a large number of them. It goes through almost a T, so about 20 or so different locations that were more fully investigated. Obviously a lot of alternatives in this area would be by experience ruled out almost automatically. Obviously, a very small single-family residential lot that doesn't provide for any ability for setbacks and has a residential house on it, we're generally going to exclude right off. He's not going to catalog that. That's just going to be included in terms of a quick analysis. There's no reason to pursue it any further. Larger parcels, particularly in this area, would have gotten a greater, more in-depth look, which we go into in terms of the site acquisition analysis. And it's a narrowing process, and ultimately some judgments get made in terms of where we think the most appropriate location is in terms of meeting to the most possible extent the bylaw requirements. One of the advantages of this particular site is although the property itself is fairly topographically diverse, as it moves towards the front, as you move actually towards this location, this is not only one of the higher points on the property, it's also one of the higher points in the area. So obviously that helps in terms of meeting the coverage objective as well.
Did you provide a hearing to say how many households you think this would cover, not including people traveling on the road? I just don't remember.
Yeah, we did. I'm just going to pull that number for you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
You got there.
So I think total offload is going to be about 1,700 between the couple sectors that Verizon has in terms of overall residential population. It's about 4,700.
4,700. And those folks those people, I assume, have different levels of service currently. You know, the closer you are to different dead spots that you kind of showed, to different levels of service they have currently. So the guy who said he couldn't find his phone in his house might have the worst. Other people might have better.
Right, as you get closer to, as you said, as you get closer to some of the existing sites, you get closer towards the commercial areas in center of town, by Salem Street, those have some existing sites, so you're getting closer to that coverage. You have a much better chance of having coverage. But the area that Verizon seeks to cover through the varsity site is really a fairly large overall unreliable area, including outdoors, and we heard that from the one abutter who was here last time.
Other than that one abutter, have we heard any other feedback from any of the other neighbors in the area, good or bad?
Not directly to us. I understand, can you speak to this, that our landlord's spoken to a couple of his neighbors that were in support, I think including the gentleman who was here
Yeah,
last
there
time.
was very much in support. So I was kind of curious, I mean, if the neighbors are all excited about this happening, they're happy, or are you getting the opposite?
Asked the standards. I talked to Mr. Young a couple of times in the last month in anticipation of just asking him to kind of poll the neighbors if he had any relationships to the side, because obviously we want to be proactive with some of the things we're doing. The gentleman, I don't know his name, but he was for it. There's a guy directly across the street that abuts the soccer field that he had said, that it's his second hand, but he had said that he had spoken with him and he would have been the most impacted. But even him with his trees in his front, he doesn't see it. But from all accounts, the neighbor, Mr. Young said that the neighbors were, I don't know that all were enthusiastic like the gentleman here last time, but
I mean, the question I would ask is if you took that photograph that we saw there and went to the soccer field on Saturday morning and showed it to every person that went to the soccer match, do you think more than a handful of people would be in favor of that?
yeah, possibly. But when they took that into account.
Actually,
Without a doubt, when you
I
explain
know, I
to
gotta
them
say,
that.
that's a soccer field, and I can
don't
use
know.
my phone.
I think most of them won't.
Would you rather make the phone call or look at that?
I think at the end of the day, most of them won't be looking at the tower. Once they have coverage, they'll be doing this.
No, that's
Or
exactly
use-
right. It's a,
They should be watching their kids anyways.
I know from my client's perspective, what we're seeing in New England is that sports fields and areas are a major point of concern for us where there's an increased demand. I have kids that play too many sports now. I'm at them every single night of the week that I'm not doing this, and everybody is using their phone. It's a place where the demand of the public is extremely high. It's one of the most significant
Sure, the demand
places.
is pretty high, but we ought to try that. I don't agree with you. I think a lot of people would go, oh my God.
I can tell you, for instance, I'm working in Carlisle right now, where they have decided to steer us from a completely hidden application inside a church and to construct a 190-foot pole at the soccer fields.
But I agree with that. That's my thought too. I actually think a soccer field, a place where you expect kind of lights and things like that, it would actually look better. I think at the soccer field than when you're on the soccer field looking out into a nice skyline that has this one tree just sticking up. So I actually like that idea of at the soccer field, because you're right. They talk about Gillette Stadium and places like that actually having the worst service because everyone's trying to use their phones at the same time.
So in relation to the soccer field, part of my how I was driven to the site where we're at. One was it's the highest point on that side. And our ideal location was on the corner of Foster and Salem, Buck, that whole interchange. But when you're dealing with a lot of town property, you got to rule that out somehow, and that whole area.
Rule it out. We have.
It's designated open space. A lot of it's, most of it's under restriction for development, so that's unable.
But have you checked on that property? 'Cause
It's all. Even if you look through all your maps on the, even what I submitted, it's designated open space, and
because we have one in Osgood Hill.
right.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that one. But part of my motivation, really, in a situation like this, am I more concerned about hiding it for the people that are there every day, or for some people that are there an hour once a week for 4 months a year. And, you know, the neighborhood, the people that live there that are impacted on it on a daily basis, as you can see by the pictures, their impact is minimal. And, you know, I always judge a site on how many people come and oppose me. And this site in particular, you know, you can see by the response that we got from the immediate people that live there has been favorable. And, you know, the soccer field, knowing it from the beginning, it was always going to be seen from there. It wasn't like we were trying to hide it. It just, you know, for that area and for what we were looking to do, given the nature of what is available for actual lease space, this is the site and the only site that we could come up with that would to meet the objective.
So instead of talking about tower or no tower, which is kind of what we're talking about here, what if instead of that binary approach, instead we talk a little bit about just the height of the tower, which seems to be the rub, if you will, in looking at some of the photos, to the extent that the height of the tower is driven by the shared space for the 5 arrays. And is there an option for 3 sets of arrays instead of 5 to reduce the height of the tower so that it still is above the trees, but not to the extent it is now? You don't sort of get that shock, and it still serves the coverage that everybody wants. I mean, let me rephrase it. Do we have a requirement to approve something with 5 shared arrays?
You don't dictate the number, but you certainly do dictate a requirement for co-location to the extent practicable and plan for, you know, for
Yeah.
future users. And so, given the kind of the status of the market in terms of both you know, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, other potential users, as well as FirstNet, which is being looked at and developed, and how that will ultimately play out as AT&T builds that out, and how they have to do it, whether they overlay it on their network or need an additional spot. All things that are part of, you know, overall Varsity's planning, and to make sure that, you know, if they're going to build it, and if it's going to get approved, that it has enough capacity, both from a structural standpoint and a compound standpoint, and from a planning standpoint, in terms of ensuring that those lower spots are usable, so that you don't get another tower in the area or in, you know, on the same property because this tower doesn't have the ability to meet the need.
But the co-locate, I think, so, I get what you're saying, but the co-location is our bylaw requirement, which we can waive if we want.
But it doesn't specify that it has to be 5.
No. So basically, we could say, if we wanted to, it can only be 100 feet, and they can figure out how many co-locations they can get on it, right? Can you get 2, can you get 3, can you get 4? That's not really up to us. They just need to do it as best they can.
But in speaking of we're a tower owner. Verizon is a tenant on our tower. AT&T is a tenant. So our design height, ultimately, ideally, the higher is better for us. So our tenants come to us and say, we need X height, and we design down from there, not up from there. And the reason we show 5 is because we build all our towers, no matter if it's 100-foot, 190-foot, to structurally accommodate 5 users for the future. So it's not, we're showing 5 just to show that the tower will have the capacity. It doesn't mean that at 100 feet it works for Verizon. Verizon and AT&T both specified what their requirements were, and then we designed down from there. So ideally we'd be at 150, because then we know the bottom 2 work, but we don't even know that the bottom 2 work for somebody right now.
So does 100 work for Verizon?
Well, we're at 117 right now. That was our optimal height, and I remember that was raised at our last meeting, and we have our RF engineers doing that work to see if we can go lower and still be effective. You get to a point where, you know, the trade-off makes it non-viable, but I don't have the analysis for you tonight to show you where it actually falls off and becomes ineffective to even go there.
The trend of the technology, I would presume over time that the amount of capacity you can put on an array increases over time. I don't know if it's directly proportional to Moore's law or how it works, but How does that work, and how does that impact your decision-making?
Well, I mean, I think overall, in terms of technology trend, you are correct that certainly today's facility with a similar number of antennas can handle more traffic or volume than the facility when I started doing this 17 years ago.
Yeah.
The difference is the exponential increase in the amount of usage as well. So whereas in 1999, 2000, it was analog voice calls only, and generally for limited periods of time because everyone was paying $2 a minute or so to use their phone. Now it's pretty much all unlimited talk, and the reality is data is the biggest driver in terms of usage. So when everyone's at practice and on their phone or
You're sort of saying a little bit like highways. Some people think if you build more highways, you'll
Right.
just generate more capacity. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Okay.
But in general, yes, they can handle more capacity, but there's now a lot more strain being put on them, and we'll continue to see that in terms of that being a driver as we move towards 5G as well, where you get the even faster speeds and greater data movement and greater ability to use the device for even more purposes. But now we're seeing people, someone can't make it to the game, but someone's there with their phone live streaming the game. So, in my family's case, grandparents can watch the game even if they're not actually there. So those are the kinds of uses. It's one of the reasons, again, why having the coverage, including the ball field, is important. The other trend, of course, is to try and, as you said, add more capacity through number of antennas. That's why, again, we've designed it as a monopine to allow for full arrays, to allow for carriers to implement their preferred solution, which leads to faster data rates and better coverage for users.
So when would the study be completed, as you mentioned, about performance at 100 feet?
We expect we'll have it in order to present it in time for it to be included in your package for the next hearing.
Any other questions from the board?
I don't have any questions, just in terms of for them, I just a question amongst ourselves. I'm just wondering, and I guess if you have an opinion about which should come first, a planning board decision or a ZBA decision. If you don't get your variance.
I'm glad you brought it up. I think in this case, we have to wait till the ZBA makes a decision. I don't think we can vote on it. Sometimes if there's a technical variance we know is, a de minimis one, we would go first, but technically we can't vote on something that we don't even know is allowed. It's not an allowed use in front of us right now. We have to get their approval first. At least that's my view.
Do you guys have a thought on that?
I do. I have an opinion on everything, but I mean, as a technical matter under Massachusetts law, you don't have to wait for the ZBA. You can make a decision, and of course, obviously, you can approve what you are lawfully allowed to, with the understanding, obviously, that we've asked for a height variance, and if we don't get it, then we can't build the height variance. But you could actually, you're allowed to actually permit up to your height under your permit granting authority, is the special permit granting authority. We certainly agree in it that it certainly made sense that, one, we would run these concurrently. Two, we will be before them, on the 10th, and at least hopefully have some sense and a sense of the questions that are being asked and where that's going from a directional standpoint. And we certainly understand that the planning board at least wants to get some indication, how that's going. But from a pure legal perspective, you can, and I've had boards, I've been doing 17 years, I've had boards do it all the time. You grant it with the understanding that, of course, whether it's conservation relief or variance relief or another form of relief that's required to implement the project and construct it, all of the required relief has to be obtained, and there isn't a legally required order in which it needs to be obtained.
So I actually agree that I think we could. I can tell you that without something from the ZBA saying that this is allowed, I would be very hard pressed to approve the permit. So I would recommend that we wait for the ZBA.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Good, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it. So
Great.
we'll be back again next time, right?
Yep, and that's the 17th, correct?
17th, yeah.
At 7. Right.
Which is it?
17th at 7.
Oh, 17th at 7, understood. So, all right.
Thank you.
Oh, but thank you, I did do the balloon test and the pictures you guys took, that was really well done, and to show us even a picture that you probably knew we wouldn't like, I think that's appreciated, but that was all I had.
Like I tell people, they're not invisible, but
Thank you.
everybody wants to use the service.
Had we not presented a ball field picture, I think you would have asked for it, so.
Did you get handled anything, Brian?
I'm sorry? I have one friend that doesn't have a phone.
Your stuff.
And he won't get one. Okay, moving right along, 1600 Osgood Street.
We dealt with that one before.
A recurring conversation, so. Hi, Jean. How are you tonight? So, I know Suzanne couldn't make it tonight because she had another commitment. But can we just, sort of as an entree before we let our friends from 16 Osgood speak, just sort of tee up kind of where we are on some things, refresh our memory where we are?
Yep, so, Mr. Larry has submitted some board documents. I think you have hard copies of them in case you did not receive them in the packet. So there is a memo to the Board of Selectmen. I think in response to some questions that, I don't think you were at the hearing, but you may have watched the hearing. Is that the case? Okay. And they've provided another deck with some revisions that they're going to review today, specifically related to, I think, their timeline and, remind me, page 16. Energy. Yes, and another point to note is a National Grid memo that was included in the packet. So the property owner has reached out to National Grid just to verify capacity and availability of capacity. National Grid submitted a letter essentially saying they don't foresee any issues. However, it will take 3 to 6 months to confirm that the capacity is available. So that was, I thought that was an important note. I know we talked about electricity coming from Wood Hill at a previous meeting.
Was the workshop today?
The workshop was today, so we'll cover that, I think, at the next piece on the framework discussion.
Okay, good, okay. So, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Dan Leary again with the the Massachusetts Innovation Works. I'm joined with by Michael Thornton from Vanderweil, who's a power engineer, energy engineer, who will one of the experts we couldn't have join us at the walkthrough, but since energy is such a large part of the project, we wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions about energy. We do have just a very short presentation answering questions again that were brought up the last time. I think there's a slide deck that says 1600 Osgood discussion. But I'll get started with it anyhow. The first question that came up at the last meeting, yes, thank you very much, was about some other examples of large indoor growing facilities. And what we did is we sort of just went out and pulled 3 examples of large indoor growing facilities. Some of them are vertical. One of them is a large indoor cannabis in Canada. One of them is a large R&D indoor growing facility. And the third one being a vertical indoor farming, which is, so these are all very similar to what we're proposing. Hopefully you have a chance to watch the YouTube videos.
Or are you going to show us anything on those 3? What am I missing?
If you go to the next slide, please, Rebecca. I'm sorry about that. We included these as videos, I thought that would be a little bit more helpful than just pictures. We could certainly come back
Okay,
with
no,
some
that's
pictures.
fine. If
yeah.
you're giving us the stuff, like, what's vertical farming? What does it even mean?
Vertical farming. So in this case, this is a it's about 100,000 square foot footprint that's got, I believe it's 25 foot to 30 foot tall structures built inside it, where they're doing indoor growing of greens mainly, in tiered levels. So they'll have 8 to 10 tiers high. So in terms of sort of an energy footprint, an overall footprint, it's similar, it's comparable. We estimated it varies between half a million to 1 million square feet of indoor culture, and that's in New Jersey. And again, I apologize. I could have put more of a summary on here, but I figured watching a 3 to 5 minute video might be more informative.
And just a couple questions on these.
Yes.
The third one is cannabis.
Yes.
And how large is that in square feet?
That is just around 1 million square foot, as I understand it.
And the middle one is not cannabis?
The middle one is not cannabis. It's indoor growing systems.
Right. And how big is that one?
They don't state how large that one is, the exact square footage, but they show some outdoor pictures of it. It's pretty sizable.
And then the first one is not cannabis?
No.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
And again, these are in addition to the other examples that we had published in the past, but sometimes seeing a video is very helpful. The second question, and I put these a little bit out of order on the next slide, please, had to do with, are there any further MEPA requirements? And in the grand scheme of the project, at some point, there may be an aspect of it that triggers further MEPA requirements. Certainly, there's a lot of MEPA activity that's inherent with the site that gets tracked and reported. Certainly, in the first phase, our engineers believe we do not trigger any further MEPA filings or reporting at that point. But this is something we certainly, with our engineering staff, track very, very closely. Next is a slide on energy management, and for this, I'd like to invite Mike Thornton to speak to the energy side of our project.
So just a little background on myself. I'm with Vanderwall Engineers. We're about a 500-person engineering firm, and I'm principal with the Power Group, and predominantly deal with utilities, inside, defense, and we also work for National Grid, Eversource, and a lot of the utilities providing substation and transmission infrastructure. So the letter from that National Grid issued is a standard letter addressing the fact that a customer has come to ask for some additional power. Vanderwall has been working at this site for over 20 years. Previously, when Lucent owned the site, we did a lot of the engineering for the electrical infrastructure on the site, as well as providing services for their MEP when they were fitting out and either changing spaces over. So we have a long history at the site. So the process is we'll put a load letter together for National Grid to tell them what the loads at the site were. Previously, the loads at this site were in the 25 megawatt range, and the infrastructure is sized for about twice that capacity. So when we look at the energy loads expected from the grow facility, it's in the range to 30 watts per square foot and about 30 megawatts, and that's based on managing the load of the LED lighting for the grow facility. The infrastructure within the site is more than capable to handle that, and there's quite an extensive infrastructure as far as wiring and transformers and substation distribution on the site to handle that, as well as the feeders coming from Ward Hill. So part of the process is that National Grid will have to, because the load on the site has been, I think, less than 3 megawatts for a period of time because Lucent had left, they have to reevaluate the new request for load at the site. So it's a normal process. So we're in the process of putting together that load letter, which would state that when the loads would come on and what they would be, and the time of day occurrence, that would occur during the day and throughout the year.
Can you give some
Sure.
context on what 30 megawatts constitutes? I mean, like, how many house equivalents is it?
It's tough to translate that to housing, but again, if you look at the size of the facility that's there, which used to be Bell Western and Lucent took it over, it's a factory site. So for a large factory site, that's somewhat a normal load for the energy intensity that would happen at the site for the different activities. And again, that's Lucent had a very energy intensive operation. They had a lot of production there. They had a lot of clean rooms. And like I said, they were using about that amount of capacity during their activities at the site. So it's tough to relate it to homes.
Is there
But
another comparison, like say, what's the, just order of magnitude load for the town?
I do not know what the load for the town is, so that's something that you could, I think the statistic you could look up. But to a house, a normal house, I mean, people put generators to back their house up all the time, and it seems like a normal size is 5 to 10 kilowatts. So this is 30 megawatts. Again, it's a large industrial site, so it's tough to translate that to housing. So essentially, there was a lot of intelligence in the existing system, and the new system would also be able to control the load. So they would be able to manage the load within the site, and where they use the grow lights, they'd be able to manage that. And there are certain programs within National Grid that allow for demand reduction, and they're also looking at potentially combined heat and power to create an efficient atmosphere, and that is to reduce heating and cooling loads by co-generating electricity and providing the heating and cooling for the facility, which that site had a larger boiler plant, so they did have large steam loads at that site, but those steam loads have diminished, and this operation will not have large steam loads, but it'll have some cooling for dehumidification. So that essentially, it's a very simple operation. It's predominantly a lighting operation with some cooling for dehumidification, and the infrastructure is sized to handle it. And we have to go through a normal process with National Grid so they can plan to provide that capacity through the wires and also through the generation. So they have to make that commitment, and the capacity is there within the infrastructure to handle it.
And when they do this standard process that you have described,
Sure.
which I appreciate it,
Yep.
good description. In your experience, how long do they typically take for a project of this size?
So we do a lot of these studies for the utilities. They're load flow analysis studies. And then they also do, in this case, they won't have to do short circuit studies. We do that for National Grid and Eversource and the utilities. But they'll have to go through, start a job number, start a process, and to evaluate the loads. And again, we'll be putting that time of day loads and when they'll be happening. And then they'll evaluate that in the system. And it goes through a couple different avenues. They'll look at how they're going to purchase the power to supply the site, just like they would the town, right? And as well as to analyze the lines and see what the loads are connected to those lines back to Ward Hill. And the Ward Hill is connected to a much higher transmission distribution, so that power issue at the Ward Hill is not a problem. But they'll go through their analysis, and it's a standard process.
And they're saying about 3 to 6 months.
That's typically the normal time. A lot of times it happens a lot quicker. We'll be providing as much information to help them work through that process quickly. And, a lot of communication is good during that process, and hopefully it happens a little sooner. But they have to go through their process, and they have other customers they have to deal with, and issues, and
if you could advance one slide, I think everything was covered in here. Maybe the only thing to add to it is in terms, like, if you recall the solar array, that was about 4.5 megawatts of output. So today it made 4.5 megawatts of output relative to the 30 that's been, to give that some kind of scale.
so there are some other programs that would be looking at too, to you know, again, National Grid and all the utilities have a demand reduction program. You know, you get into the heat of the summer and everybody hears about brownouts. The system has been, the 123 system that Ward Hill's connected to is very stiff and a solid supply system. Don't see that as an issue here, but part of the master plan is taking advantage of all of the demand reduction programs that National Grid and the other utilities have in either battery storage or PV or load management to be able to reduce the impact on the grid and actually help the grid. So you're in those type of programs, you're talking with the station manager and getting emails a day ahead to say, hey, we need people to reduce their power input.
Actually, I think you brought up an interesting point related to redundancy. And how do you achieve redundancy? And sort of conversely, what's the consequence if you're ever down and out of power? And how long would it be before you had a real problem?
Well, I don't know if you want to answer this or you want me to take a shot at it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we deal, again, a large part of our business is critical infrastructure for universities. We do a lot of government laboratories for, FBI forensics labs. We do a lot of work with critical infrastructure, and power has to stay on, either for computers or for research. This facility, I wouldn't put it in that category because it's a grow facility, so if the lights go off, there's no catastrophic effect for 12 hours. We have data centers, people, not allowed to talk to about some of the people we work for, but with data centers, they don't want it to go down. So losing power is it's backed up by a lot of emergency generators. This type of application doesn't have that requirement, so, right?
Correct. This.
So if you went into a demand, this is a perfect application for the utility in a demand reduction program where they say, hey, we have a problem with the grid. Can you reduce your intake by 5 to 10 megawatts for the next 12 hours? I would imagine this facility would not have a problem doing that. And, there are a lot of programs out there that try and do that, reduce the impact. The impact on the grid typically is less than 4 hours when they have a high demand period. So people who are called into demand reduction usually only have to reduce their intake for 2 to 4 hours.
You have to know which generating sources they typically draw on to supply Ward Hill?
No, that's done through the generation suppliers who bid into the New England ISO market. So they're bid in by all series of generators, whether they be nuclear, fossil, coal, or gas, and then PV. They all bid in, and so that's typically handled on a day ahead situation. So that's why they know about it in about a day ahead.
I was just curious if you knew what the pattern was for Ward Hill as in terms of which generator supplies. Over time, just what the pattern
It's really, it's managed by New England ISO.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
We could talk about energy all night. That's kind of our passion, the two guys sitting at this table, and we'd love to, but you might see the summary is this project is really National Grid, ISO New England look at this project as an asset, is the bottom line with energy. It's not all available on day one. A big chunk of it is available on day one that we need for phase one, but it's something that comes online, and again, it really, in its scale, this is a community asset for grid resilience and sustainability, we believe. Thank you. The next slide on The question was about capitalization. Yeah, I think we can hit on that another night, I think. Thank you. Capitalization, so the question was, how is this project capitalized? And it's capitalized, there's two components to the $100 million. That's the estimated build-out costs for, again, this is for the full scale of the project, not for phase one. But of the equity and debt that's being brought to the project, the equity being brought by the owners of the property. The owners of the property have a portfolio of real estate in the area, and this is well within what the size project they're able and willing to take on. In addition, there'll be debt brought into the project, be it from traditional banks or from other types of equipment financing. I mean, I don't know, if you look at the capital profile of the project, a big chunk of this is equipment. So there's certainly, as you can imagine, plenty of discussions and interest in financing of equipment on the project. So that's the capital structure in a nutshell.
I mean, not that it's our primary responsibility, but is this a kind of capital structure that's highly leveraged? I mean, what's roughly, is there more debt than equity, or?
I'll have to get back to you with that question. Again, I think maybe the best way to look at it is if you look at the equipment, the major equipment, the brown and there's more debt. I'd have to get the exact ratio for you, but it's largely equipment debt, equipment financing. That's a possible structure. There's equipment, the same equipment manufacturers that want to be part of the Innovation Center are quite interested in having their LEDs showcased at the site. The next slide is again maybe a little bit more of a discussion. This slide consists of a statement and a question. So please don't. We don't mean to be presumptuous in asking the question, but the question is what was brought up. What are the uses that they're going to be at the Innovation Center, and how do you handle those with respect to permitting possibly? So our statement is the bottom part of the slide, which is we'd sort of say that there's three buckets of tenants and partners that are going to come into the innovation that are going to be on the property. The first bucket is the red block, which is the licensed uses. So these are entities like when we come in for a special permit, hopefully soon, that will be a licensed tenant. The second group is the green block, which is on the far left, which is the non-licensed. An example of that might be just somebody that does not require a license but works somewhere in the space of cannabis or medical devices or growing equipment or something like that. And then there's this third bucket in the middle, the yellow one, which is probably the more complex one to talk about, but it's the non-licensed uses that need to partner in some way. So that a non-licensed, somebody that might be making a piece of equipment, for example, that needs to be at a location like this versus being somewhere, on Main Street to do their work. And so we just kind of wanted to show you that, and I'd be happy to give examples if that'd be helpful, but how we'd sort of categorize each of the three of these. But we wanted to do this to tee up the question that really comes up in maybe the next discussion with respect to the bylaw is, well, let's say we have 50, 60, maybe 100 tenants of various size at this property. Do they all need to come in for a special permit? Are they all going to be handling cannabis? Those types of questions. And so what we kind of proposed is something to consider with. If you look at if they require a license, there's certainly a special permit granting authority. On the other end of the spectrum, if they could set up their operation on Main Street, but they happen to have the word cannabis in their name or something like that, maybe they just need a building permit and they fall into the existing building plan. But probably, I think the questions that were brought up at the last meeting are the ones that are most complex, which is, well, what about the people, what about I gave the example of the lighting manufacturer that wants to do LED lighting research at the property. They're not going to go and get a license with the state. In that case, they would fall into this other bucket that we would, propose. We have a proposal of how we might work with them, with the town.
So they're not going to get a license because you say they're not going to be a retailer. They're not going to be one of these, but I'm not sure, and that's probably more for your side to figure out that they would be able to handle cannabis more than an ounce if they were not licensed.
Exactly.
So I guess my point is I'm not sure that yellow box exists. I'm not sure you're going to be able to handle cannabis if you don't have a license. I just don't know.
And I don't want to confuse handle with chain of custody. So there's regulations that'll come out on this, and we've looked at other states, like
Right, but if
Colorado.
they're your
that might,
employee and they're going to move it from one place to one place,
Right.
they're part of your company, your cultivation company, that's fine, they're under your umbrella. But what I assume you're talking about is an independent corporation that does
Yes.
medical testing devices, and they want to be next to the cultivation facility, say, hey, great, we can get some of this and some of this and some of this, and go over and we'll test it, and great, we have easy access, and we can say, hey, can you make some of this, some of that. That's what I assume you're kind of talking.
Not at all like that, but I understand your point.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what I, so.
that wouldn't be allowed, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So then
yeah.
what is a non-licensed partner who would be handling cannabis?
I'll give the example of, I can give two examples of people that are really interested. So take the LED lighting manufacturer.
Yeah.
The LED lighting manufacturer may be invited, so let's start off with the licensed grower that has a permit to grow in this facility. The LED manufacturer may be invited in to conduct experiment. Now it depends on how the regulations are written.
If he's coming to your building and doing something there, then as long as that is allowed under your permit and your license, to me that has nothing to do with that business. It's if the only way that we get involved or the state gets involved is if that business, as I understand it, would be handling cannabis on its own.
Correct.
Otherwise, they'd have to be and I don't know what the regulations are going to say, which whether they can do that under your license. But so that's what I'm saying. I don't think this. I don't think this yellow box exists. I think there's the non-licensed people who are not going to be handling cannabis. So if it's a manufacturing facility that can do manufacturing in a manufacturing zone location, great. They do manufacturing. They never need to see us. They never need to talk with us. If they need a license, then they need to talk with us.
I'd like to know, Dan, you said you had two examples. So one is the LED manufacturer that might be on site and testing its different variations of its LED lights. What's the other example?
So another example is a company that makes a device that does part of the processing. So after the plants are harvested, they have to be processed. There's a machine that it's called bucking, if you remember that from the walkthrough. So let's say that a company wants to develop that machine at the facility. There's a great benefit to developing at the facility because they have an area to bring it over and test it. So that would be an example of, again, they're at the facility because they have a machine that is being developed for cultivation of this, but they wouldn't, they would not be given custody of. They would, they're not part of the chain of custody of the product that they're testing, that they're doing R&D with.
I agree with Ken that it seems to me is if you're putting the machine in your facility, it's part of your permit. The only way they would need their own is if they had within their own four walls with their own locks on the doors, you had to bring some marijuana in there to do the testing in there.
Yes.
But if you kept it in your facility,
Exactly.
yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So and again, like I said, I don't know if the regulations will allow for that for someone to come that's not part. But but I don't think that's.
It's a topic that's was being discussed today at the Cannabis Control Commission. Is how they want to encourage research. How do they do it? Is R&D a subset of the existing licenses? Is it going to take more of a Colorado approach with having, licensed and registered handlers and things like that? But our point in bringing this up is because we don't envision, but we certainly hate to see a scenario where the planning board gets filled up with special permits for people that aren't really.
What I would do, this is just my initial thought. I haven't sort of put a whole lot of thought and effort into it. But if you go, let me take the analogy of when we do a special permit for a retail project. Okay, and you can take the one that we did for Jeddah Farm as a good example. It was partly residential, but partly retail. And we approved a certain amount of retail space. Okay, we approved it, and basically subject to the uses that were allowed in the district. And I think what we did is, parking was a little bit of a special consideration. But the point ends up being is what we did is we approved a certain amount of square footage for retail, and whether it's broken into 5 stores or 8 stores or 2 stores, it doesn't matter. We approved it, it's done. And only if what got built is totally out of scope of that in terms of parking, which probably is not going to happen because we built off the maximum parking requirement, we're okay. I could envision here, and again, I'm thinking out loud, I don't know the answer, is that if we were to permit this, we would permit a certain amount of what I'm going to say, I don't know if you would call it the testing lab one. Let me just use that as proxy. We might at the beginning permit so many square feet of that, and as long as you stay within that limit, we'd be okay. And if you went above that cap, you'd have to come back. That seems to me to be a way to do it. But it may not encompass every type of use. So I'm just throwing the idea out, as a concept. I think it would be a clean way to do it. We would just have to be careful that all the individual uses didn't create a disruption that we hadn't thought of that we would like to have some regulatory authority over. But I don't know if anybody else has a thought about that. I'm not wed to this idea, but it was just the first thought I had.
I mean, I think there's, and this sort of goes into the bylaw discussion, but I see, the way I envision it in my head is that it's an overlay district, right? So we have an overlay district, whether it's at Osgood and we get rid of the other one, or we keep both of them, or we figure out how to do that. So this is an overlay district. So I liked the idea of having the different special permits for each of the type of licenses available through the state. And then they added one of R&D, which sort of kind of talks with Dan what you were talking about. And then, to have each of those as special permits. And I mean, I'm not sure if we need, to me, it's each individual company or corporation. If you own the space or you're using the space, and you come in and apply for a special permit.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a little bit different to what I proposed. But again, I'm not wed to it, but I just worry if you have 50 places with 4,000 square feet, whether we would be deluged with permits and what would be the incremental value.
Maybe, but I think I'm not sure that can we give a permit for everything to Osgood, say, and then they divvy them out? Because each of those places is going to have to get their own permit from the state, Yeah. They're each going to have to get their, as I understand it. So I don't know.
Well, that's the point. Is that many, like the LED lighting company and the the bucking machine company would not be. They're not license holders.
Right. So to me, though, if you're not a license holder,
but you don't need I don't think you need a special permit.
Then you don't need a special permit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I'm saying, if there's let's say you have, you build 750,000 square feet for cultivation. Okay, that's one company cultivating. You get a cultivation license, and maybe you have a manufacturing license. Okay, you get that license. If there's going to be a company next door that has 4,000 square feet and is going to be an independent laboratory, to me, I think they need to get their own license and their own special permit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is that since they have to go to the state anyway to get a permit, they have to go through a regulatory process. It's not like a regular retail store where each store we don't require a special permit. Right. This is a little bit different, so I could see, it may be more work for us, but maybe that's the path we go down. So,
but I think it'll be a good amount of work in a short term, but then I don't think you're gonna have a tremendous, what, if it works and it's established, I wouldn't think you would have a tremendous rollover, I think you'll find a lot of actually businesses that don't need licenses. I mean, I think that's the idea. You have this one big center that's gonna need the cultivation license and the manufacturing, and a lot of the smaller ones that may not need licenses themselves. Or if they are, I don't think it would be a big lift, to do the special order. That's how I see it. And especially, and if there's no retail in this zone, that knocks that out, and you can do retail one or two other places in town, and that's that.
Yeah, in the case of like an independent laboratory, which requires a license, that would certainly need to come and get a special permit. But we don't envision, if there's 50 companies in the facility that are trying to operate, I don't know if a few of them, 3, 4, 5 may be permit license, may require a license, just to put it in perspective. So that's the point of the red block, is that they require a special permit, but they're not the overwhelming quantity of companies that we're seeing.
What other type of companies are you, is there a financial group that's in this market? What other types of companies are you seeing interested in this type of center?
Devices.
Okay.
We have a couple, maybe more, companies that are working on sobriety testing equipment, as an example. There's a lot of different harvesting R&D types of companies, the LED, and anything related to cultivation, and control systems, data companies are another example. And then a lot of applied research as well, general applied research.
Okay.
So the, I think this is nearly our final slide. So with respect to the bylaw that was discussed, we didn't have a chance to ask last time, but we did put together a document that lists 9, and actually there's a 10th minor comment having to do with R&D that we want to add to this, but we felt that it would be helpful for you to see that as a potential applicant in the future to this bylaw, that we don't have a whole lot of comments related to what's been drafted. The work's been excellent. I think it's exemplary. Our team thinks it's exemplary. I'd be happy to go through these if you wanted to see them, but I think our ask for this meeting. I'm sorry. This is the top.
It's the same one. Yeah, we have it here.
Yeah, it's
okay.
labeled 1 through 9. Our ask would be if there was the opportunity in the coming week to have a sit down with a working group or the town administration offices to discuss these and sort of make our case about them. Some of them are extremely obvious and should not be an issue, but that would be our ask. That would.
What do you think, Gene? Should we do it in this forum, or should we do it in another forum?
We can start in another forum if you'd like. I mean, I can sit down with the proponents and go through my comments with these.
I don't know,
It's a
what
little
do
bit
people
more
think?
into
Would
the
you
weeds
prefer to
than you're
do
at
it
now, is
here
all I would
because
say.
it's more transparent, or would the working group help tee up some issues?
I mean, I didn't have time in the last couple of weeks. I have some comments to share, which I'll send along. I mean, I don't particularly have a problem with people working in the background and then coming and presenting what their thoughts are to us. I mean, I think it's hard to get a lot of people to. So I don't have a problem with that. And if we have comments of sharing it, or if someone wants to go, but I personally think that's fine. I did have some similar questions as well.
Anybody else have a strong opinion?
I think a working group might be a good idea. I think that there is a lot of sort of smaller details to work through with this, and I think that if we're sitting in a meeting for 2 hours before we even get to talk about what the bylaw looks like, it might be useful to work through some of the issues and then come back and talk about it as a board.
Good. Darren, do you have any strong opinion?
who would participate in the working group?
Hopefully at least one of us, I think. Volunteers here?
I'm happy to participate in it.
Yeah. Great, good.
Can, I think it would be helpful, I know we're gonna move on to the bylaw, for us to give some high-level thoughts. I think the working group is great for, like Jen said, to work out the details, but I think it would be good for us to give some kind of high-level thoughts on how we further envision the, you know, the bylaw overlay district versus, you know, breaking out into uses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
Good, good. Pete? You, working group, yes, no? Maybe?
I'll cede to the other views. I think I'm just undecided at this point. So.
Yeah, okay. Chris?
I think it's a good idea not to have a group like this to be here until 11 o'clock at night or midnight trying to hash out details. I mean, for one thing, you're just too tired. You're not going to give it your full attention. A small working group that's doing it, you know, during the day or in the morning, after you've had a chance to study, it makes an awful lot of sense. I mean, many other committees function like that, you know, and like the high level stuff, you know, after you come with a presentation, makes a lot of sense.
We can review the details at the end, you know, I mean, which I expect to do, and
I mean, you get best ideas.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So you're going to be, and Suzanne, right?
Yeah.
Rebecca and Jen, if you could do it, and I think everybody else can opine, you know, give their opinion, but
And I-
we plan that's,
I think those high-level items were kind of detailed in that memo with those 5 questions. 'Cause, you know, we got to that point, and then it's hard to fill in the detail without having a sense of
yeah.
what uses you want to allow, not allow, all, or not, you know, some, where you'd like to see them, things like that will really help get into the detail of the bylaw.
Yeah.
So that's actually the reason for my being undecided on this question, because I think the high-level guidance is really laid out with the memo from Suzanne with the 5 questions. And I don't think we really have addressed those 5 questions. So I appreciate the utility of a working group in principle. I just...
So I was hoping we could actually turn to those.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have time today, that's what I was hoping.
Yeah, I think we should spend some time going through them.
I agree we should spend time on them, but I'm not sure that, you know, in the ending portion of one meeting, we're going to check them all off.
Oh, no.
And
I agree.
so again, working group for the reasons everyone's talked about, I think makes sense, but...
They may have to start over if...
Well, it's kind of I guess it's kind of my point. Is the working group going to start now before we've really gone through these 5 fundamental questions? And if the working group does start now and has really valuable, useful input, but that's not where the 5 questions go, do you almost, as a result of inertia, well, we've already done this work? I worry a little bit about the sequencing, I guess is what I'm saying.
I mean, I think we should have our statement of principles first about what's the important stuff. We should have a consensus on that before we really start to do the sausage making, which a working group would do.
And that gets to, I know that you're looking for that this week for the working group, and I understand the idea is to have something before the next meeting, and I think I get that, but I also think the high-level guidance is very, very important, and I don't know that we're going to check off all these boxes tonight. So that...
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think we should have a pretty clear sense of direction before we start working the details. I mean, even something like, you know, I'm dying to find out what the soiree today was about and whether we learned anything and if it would change our direction at all. So, you know, let's come back to it. Let's have the discussion on the higher level stuff, and let's maybe come back to this. I think we agreed that the idea is a good idea. It's just a question of how soon we start and what the mandate is. So, Are you guys have anything more of just general nature, or do we?
I have one last sentence just to conclude with.
Yeah.
So again, thank you. The last thing is, Gene had mentioned very early on, is that we did, after watching the last Board of Selectmen's meeting, write a memorandum to the Board of Selectmen to clarify a couple points of ours that hopefully help with some of the guidance. One of them is that we'd be, of the 5 licenses that are out there, we would not be seeking retail, no retail. And the second point is, with respect to timing, is that we support the recreational moratorium staying in place, and we put in a date of April 1st, but this, if we don't have the opportunity to sort of, in the next discussion you'll have tonight, hopefully that helps, if it helps you understand our position of, there's no intent of doing anything with recreational before certainly not before the warrant closes for the annual town meeting. So, thank you.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, were there other questions?
Where's Hooks?
I should have said that. My apologies. Hooks had to go down to Washington, D.C. to attend to some matters, so he couldn't join us tonight, but he sent me a text right before this and said, Dan, don't screw this up. So, he's watching right now, I'm sure. Yeah, Hooks will be back on the 17th, and he'll be with me at the Selectmen's meeting too.
Okay.
Okay. So I know you're very interested in today's conference. Primarily focused around just really the progression of the X, where it started and what Chapter 5 changes were. And so and I'm going to send it to everybody tomorrow so you have time to read it before the next planning board meeting. But I think it really summarizes and kind of points out the steps along the way and where we are today in terms of local control. A lot of it's about the prohibited or limiting statute now, and she's highlighted certain sections, but I would encourage you to read, if you can, read it all, because there's just little nuances in there that haven't been raised here, but I think they're important.
Is that something we have now or will have?
I think, I'm sorry?
Is that
No,
something we have?
so this was today at the conference.
Right.
It was handed out. You've had it in a number of pieces, and so they've been
Okay.
rather kind of big documents that were all attached to your planning board packet, but this really puts them all together and shows you the
But you're going
progression.
to send that out.
I will send it.
That was my question.
Yep,
Okay.
so I received it today. There was also a presentation from a planner from the Metro West Planning Authority, and he's going to post that on the website. He hadn't done it before the meeting. But again, it would just kind of raise really land use type concerns and permitting concerns, mostly associated with retail in terms of size of buildings, could be queuing outside, you need to address parking, landscaping, signage, things like that. So it was a real good, just keep things in the forefront in terms of what you may want to consider as you write this bylaw. So again, as soon as I can get that presentation, I'll send it along with this. And that's just a planner's perspective, not legislature, not anybody from a state organization. So obviously they reviewed the timing of regulations, which is still on track for March 15th. I think bylaws are being crafted, bylaws are being submitted. The Attorney General Margaret Hurley from the Attorney General's office indicated that they will approve a bylaw that is in line with the regulations, but as you know, the regulations aren't out, and so she certainly has a period of time to review bylaws. She indicated 90 days, however, she's got the authority to extend that review as well. And so I know you're up against.
Has any been approved? Sorry.
Where does it stand, like, at the state, in terms of, did you get any statistics of, like, how many towns are plunging ahead versus how many have hard moratoriums?
She indicated that they've reviewed 100 bylaws and 11 are pending right now. She did share some bylaws for towns that are looking to actually extend the moratorium into 2019, and they did not approve the extension of that under the clause of you need reasonable time to review. And she thinks as things are on track now for the regulations coming out on time, a December of 18 moratorium is appropriate. So some people have tried to submit that. There have been a couple of towns that have submitted, I believe Williamstown and Halifax have submitted bylaws that do address commercial. However, I don't think they've got any decision on them. I looked them up on their website today. I didn't see a decision, and she didn't include that decision in the packet either. So whether they're still under review, whether she's, waiting on timing of regulations, I'm not sure. So.
It sounds like there's not anybody that's come up with a super, what I'm gonna call a very robust, comprehensive bylaw similar to what we're trying to do.
Not to this magnitude. Again, the ones I can send you what was submitted from those two towns with this packet. They certainly were, like a two-page sheet of, an industrial zone could allow this type of use. And you can see the framework of what they put it in, but certainly not to the degree of what we're contemplating in terms of magnitude. And it's just that one page, so like I said, I don't know.
How did they address the issue of the relationship between the regulations and bylaws? I mean, at one level you could deal with that problem by just saying you have to comply with all the regulations, but did they say anything about how the regulations might upset the structure of somebody's zoning and how you deal with that?
I think they just cautioned that the regulations may deal with this and the regulations may deal with that. They just cautioned, they don't know what they're going to entail. So, Peter was there as well, so.
I was there as well, and it was, 3 hours?
Yep.
I don't want to try to encapsulate 3 hours into 2-minute summaries, so I strongly suggest that you read the summary that Jean's going to send in the morning. And they had a bunch of references, but that's the best one. Would you agree? In terms of, that's the one document that's really useful to review.
Yep.
To kind of capture the essence.
Yep.
But I did walk away with one impression, that every speaker, I wish I had one of those counters that you use if, like, people are coming into the theater, for every time one of the speakers said, not sure, don't know, can't tell.
And that's all
because
the
things are
caution.
pending, right?
Right. So, this is going to be licensed by the state. Will it require local licensing? We don't really know whether it will be local license. The planner talked about these one-day events. So a lot of times people come before the selectmen for a one-day liquor license. Will there be things like that? So there's.
Yeah.
So there was a consistent theme. Every question that was asked, part of the answer was a caution. We can't say for sure, we don't know, uncertain. So that's what I walked away with is we are in a state of flux and uncertainty, and they were very careful to express that. Have I characterized that correctly?
I think they added that
Rebecca, you
question.
were there as
Rebecca's
well?
there as well.
And the other impression was it was well attended. After the session started, they were still bringing in tables and chairs because there were so many standing people. It was very well attended. And traffic on 495 was bad.
In the morning. But I think this information's helpful, and it took a lot of documents that we've looked at and made it just a lot more concise and showed the progression really well. But primarily, it was about the local control, that big change in terms of what locally we can do in terms of the bylaw structure. Okay. So that being said, Dan referred to the last selectmen meeting. The Board of Selectmen did start briefly to discuss uses. So as you know, Suzanne recommended that once you get to the point where either recommending limiting or prohibiting certain uses, she would recommend both a general bylaw as well as a zoning bylaw. That was also repeated today. So more of a belt and suspender approach, that both of those bylaws would be updated. The selectmen are going to take up the topic on the April 16th meeting, so that's only a day ahead of your next meeting, to really, again, just kind of get a sense of where people stand in terms of the uses themselves. May or may not be a vote at the next meeting, but I think just both boards now have to stay in sync. I told Andrew if you get into that topic tonight, I'll certainly share with him, just if there was a sense, if there was a decision, and then at some point there'll either be a general bylaw and a zoning bylaw if you're going to either prohibit or limit any of these uses. Okay, so that leads to timing. At the last meeting, you had asked for just kind of a rough weeks out timetable for a town meeting, whether it's special or a annual town meeting. And so I included that in the packet. Now, requires a little bit of explanation because, as you know, a zoning amendment would be submitted to the Board of Selectmen. Typically, at town meeting time, there's actually a published report that says articles are due on this date. The selectmen hear it on their agenda, and they'll open a warrant, they close warrants, things like that. So as far as a starting point, I just started with an amendment would be submitted to the Board of Selectmen. And that would go on their agenda. So the timing of submitting it to the manager's office and it actually getting to the agenda, there could be a week play in that. And then the Board of Selectmen, actually, if they call a town meeting, so they may not call one, they might say, we want to review this for another couple meetings. They may say they don't want a special town meeting. We're going to hold this to annual town meeting. But if they were to say they want to call a town meeting, they refer the article back to the planning board. And so then that kind of triggers the notice to the Tribune. That has to be to the Tribune the Thursday before run date, so that you post it on Thursday to them. It runs the next week and the following week, so 2 weeks in a row, and then the public hearing would actually open. Once the public hearing opens, you meet every other week typically, but if it were to have happened in this month of October, there's a 2-week gap at the end of the month because it's a 5-week Tuesday. So those are just some of the variables that can come into play. You typically have 3 public hearings for a town meeting warrant article.
Can I ask a question? Is that required, the 3 public hearings?
It is not required, but it's been practiced, so I just tried to stay consistent.
What is the requirement? Just curious.
A public hearing.
Just one?
Yeah, so you have to have a public hearing on a zoning article.
I see.
Historically, we have it the first April meeting, so there's 2 April meetings, the first Tuesday in May.
Mm-hmm.
Town meeting is typically the 3rd Tuesday, so.
If it's going to be something that you think is well attended, have they had them in the past in other places?
Not since I've been here. So, John, you might be able to speak to that. The public hearing, has it ever been so active that we had to hold it in a larger facility?
No, I don't ever remember any that have brought a ton of people in. I mean, having said that, I think this one actually is a little bit different, and that whether we do it as part of that public hearing or solicit public input more broadly, that's clearly, I think, one of the things we want to do.
So again, based on the timing of this, I was thinking the public forum for the master plan is November 2nd. And so if you wanted us to make an announcement of that, if you wanted to schedule a public hearing, just to try to get public comment, even outside of this arena.
Well, I mean, if you're having that, it would be good to solicit opinion at that and have a conversation on this topic. I wouldn't want it to be hijacked for that purpose, but.
So I talked to the consultant and they were concerned with that. So if they're stations and they're really gonna move around pretty quickly through these 8 stations, and they were concerned with that. So I thought, even outside of this, if you wanted to try to get more public, that maybe we could just schedule a public hearing to discuss this topic, outside of a public hearing for a zoning amendment.
Well, I'm not sure it's officially a public hearing, it's a public meeting, right?
A public meeting, just something to think about. If you, that's a November 2nd public forum. We hope to get 100 there. We're hoping for 150, but they felt that if 100 people show up at that public forum, it would be a success. So again, we typically, that 3rd public hearing usually doesn't close that night. You typically leave it open to the half hour before town meeting, and just in case anything was to happen in those 2 weeks, and then you usually close it just prior to that. So this just really was trying to mimic a typical one. There is not a requirement for 3 public hearings.
And so that's a sort of straw timing from the time that we are satisfied with what we're ready to submit.
Right.
I mean, arguably you could shrink it down a week or so, but, it's...
True. If the Board of Selectmen was Monday and they open the warrant, they accept that, turn it back to me, and you wanted me to just go right straight to notice on that Thursday, I could do that, and it could be posted the next week. So, yes, I think we could make it a little tighter, but for planning purposes, I would leave it at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's all contingent on agendas and meeting dates.
Yeah.
Okay. Eitan, did that satisfy what you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at probably 10 to 12 weeks and potentially more if it's something that the Board of Selectmen want to discuss further, or if the Planning Board wants to discuss further, or if we want to solicit comments or have, I think we should have a discussion about it. It's an interesting question of, do you want to have comments before you have a proposed bylaw, or do you want to give a proposed bylaw and let people have comments on it? And I'm not sure. If you get comments beforehand, they're probably going to be really wide-ranging, but they may have some good ideas. If you do it afterwards, it's more limited. So I don't know. That's kind of what the public hearings are for. I do think that if we do have, part of the public hearings, it's going to need more room than this, just based on what I've seen and read.
Probably we'd go someplace else, yeah.
So no, but this is very helpful, and I think it any way we cut it, it's not a quick process. That's a 3-month process right there. So
one of my sort of reactions to this discussion and this is, I think it is an excellent and helpful question of what the requirement is versus the practice.
Right.
1 versus 3, to sort of inform us. I'm putting this against the context of the town voted in the general election no, and then at the town meeting, it failed to pass.
Still got a majority.
But failed to pass.
Right.
And so, to me, what that says is there's been 2 indications of where's the town. And to me, that emphasizes a critical need for public engagements in the form of the public hearings. Because if this does go ahead, it runs counter to those. And based on what? Is that the time that we would want to say, despite the practice, we've cut short? And we'd have a rationale, hey, that's all that's required, but I'd have a hard time explaining that against that context. And I do have a sense that we have 2 substantial data points of where the town is that we should not ignore. I think we ignore at our peril. And what's the answer to that? The answer is public forum. And to me, that argues to be err on the side of good opportunities for public input because of those 2 important data points. And I think it will serve everyone well, and I mean everyone, to have that robust engagement by the time we get to a town meeting, whenever that may be, because otherwise that's going to be the debate.
Yeah.
Why was this not fully aired? And I don't think that serves anybody. And it would put me in an uncomfortable position.
I fully agree with Peter. I think getting it right is much more important than getting it fast. The faster, there's no reason to delay, and I don't think we have. And I think, I again want to say that I think having this abilities with the specific project at Osgood to ask questions and get answered, I think has been fantastic. And I think really have done a great job of answering the questions as they've come up. And I really think there is a great opportunity for a really good bylaw here, and we're moving towards that. But I think you're right. I think it can't be oversold, it can't be overstated, it has to be right, and it has to be explained, and it has to be consider everything and everybody's points of view. So
And I would just add to your comments that I appreciate the subject matter experts that have been brought to bear this go-around that we didn't have the opportunity to hear from in the spring. I think that has added a lot. That has been very helpful to the process, so thank you.
So we agree, I think it's robust, transparent, and complete, really.
You know, if I see a risk here, it's violating any one of those three.
Yeah.
It
actually is very, I think you hit the nail on the head is that what you don't want to get yourself into is somebody opposing it because of process and timing, and you want to say, no, this has been fully vetted. You can't make that argument once the thing is done, because everybody had a chance to speak, everybody had a chance to learn. That's where we want to be.
And I think it could, a very real scenario where someone could stand up and say, hey, I don't get it. We voted against this, and then we voted it down. Why are we here? And I think the answer to that would have to be those three things. And really just show that it was very open, very transparent, very thorough. Because otherwise, how do you answer those questions? And if anything makes me nervous, which is probably apparent, it's this.
Okay.
So what's next for us?
So that says to me, the other thing is, we have a rough idea of, I think what we, as we move along, we might want to flesh out some of the more specific things we do during that time period to get more public input. I kind of think you're better off having a straw bylaw before you get all the public input, because if you have no structure at all, I mean, if the sentiment were overwhelmingly against the direction we went in, we could pivot away from it, but, I think we're better off putting our stake in the ground, so. So I feel like maybe we think a little bit more about what some of the process steps we take once we're ready to move forward. But we also have to, we're still in the process of, we don't have our bylaw yet that we feel comfortable on. We're still, we're between the high level philosophy and the working group stuff, there's still a lot of work to go.
Can we talk for a few minutes about the philosophy? I mean, I know it's
Yeah.
getting a little bit late, I know.
Yeah.
So, at least from what I'm seeing, I really like the way that the draft bylaw has been created. Obviously, I think that there are some tweaks and details to be worked out, and I think the working group is great for that. To me, I think the best approach would be, at least what I would be in favor of, would be an overlay district at the location where we think, based on the map and based on even a potential project, where a manufacturing, cultivation, laboratory, and medical would be appropriate. I mean, at this point, I think Osgood is that place. I'm pretty satisfied with the presentation and things like that. And we'll obviously have to craft all the special permit requirements and all the things like that, and we can talk about scale and all those things down the line. But in terms of location, I think it is an appropriate location for manufacturing. I think it is an appropriate location for cultivation. I think it's an appropriate location for a laboratory. They've said they don't want retail there. Fine, great. They said they want to start with medical. Fine, that works for me. So the answer to me would be an overlay district there, which solves the problem of if it's a use that's allowed there already, we don't have to deal with it. So if you're going to be manufacturing medical devices and you don't need a cannabis license, then great, set up shop. We never need to see you because you can do your thing with the building inspector, electrical, fire, all of that. That's great. We have site plan review, we have special permit for the facility. So I think that, and we just limit it to that location. So now we have a place in town where there is medical, which we have to do by law, and we have a place for all of these other things. I see no reason to limit them in number of licenses other than that this is a particular location. In terms of retail commercial, I think it's a bad idea to ban it outright legal in use of marijuana for people over 21 is legal in the state. I think banning it outright just creates a black market. It creates, which is dangerous in itself, just in terms of a criminal element and in terms of you're getting product that is not tested, so potentially laced with fentanyl and things like that. It's just a bad idea. I think limiting is an appropriate idea. We have the ability just to really, as a right, to limit it to a certain number. So I would say, especially if you look at the guideline, which is the 20% of the package store licenses, that's 2, limited to 2. Do it in places that we generally allow retail with the criteria of, shape the criteria that it's not near a school and things like that. I think it's going to be a pretty limited area, and that would be my approach, a general suggestion of my approach. So that's kind of where my head's at.
I like that.
I would say,
It's a lot of thought, that's nice.
Yeah, and I've landed at almost exactly the same place. The only thing I would add to that is that I think it's important that we leave the Osgood zoning in place, particularly given what we know about the owners of that property also potentially pursuing an Amazon headquarters there. I think it's important that other businesses be allowed to develop there should that ever come to fruition. I mean, I'm personally not optimistic that we're going to be the most attractive site in the entire country for Amazon, but I would hate to see us do something now that would ever foreclose that. I say leave the door open, but I agree almost entirely with what Etan said with that additional thought.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably there with most of it, but I just wanted to put out a couple of additional twists to the model. Is if you remember the last time, the overlay was a little bit different. The overlay was some land on Holt Road, and then it was added in the Lucid property, so it was a little bit bigger. And it's not clear to me whether, I think what you're suggesting is there be an overlay just to include the Lucid property for all the uses and licenses except for the retail. I think that's what I would say.
It doesn't have to be just the Osgood, probably, if there's somewhere part of the.
Well, this is a little bit where I'm going with
Yeah.
it, is I would feel sort of more comfortable with an approach where we take basically the same overlay we had before, which composed of 2 things, and we allow all the uses in both of them. Although I want to come back to the Holt Road about for the non-retail uses for a second. And basically allow the retail within the Osgood, but actually have them covenant out that they won't do it because they've already said they wouldn't do it. So we could just ask them to restrict that use by covenant, which we've done in many cases in the past. And then the only area that would be retail would be the whole road piece, and I think you have more control over it that way. That's probably the one twist to it that I would add.
Why would you allow it if they weren't going to do it? I'm just curious why.
Well, because they can covenant, you can covenant the use out.
For future companies?
Yeah, I mean, you could for that location, because what it does is if you don't covenant it, you can change your bylaw anytime you want it in the future. And if you really don't want it there, put it in by covenant.
So you allow the use, but you allow the use in the property, but don't allow them to sell retail?
Well, they would voluntarily concede, since they don't want to do it, that they would give up that right. We've done that, for example, there have been cases where we've rezoned property to allow, like, property for general business as part of a rezoning, because they want to do a certain type of thing, but some of the uses under general business are ones we don't want. We wouldn't want in
I
that
see.
location, so you ask them to covenant
So
out.
just keep it in the blanket, but for this instance, say
Yeah.
that particular thing you're not going to do.
Yeah.
And then allow it somewhere else
Yeah.
in town?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, that's just a possibility, or we could keep it out completely and just allow it in the other area. I mean, either one, I haven't sort of thought through that completely, but that would be a twist. So I think 90% of it, I think we're there, and there's maybe a little bit of fine tuning
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's definitely worth considering. I wonder if we could also consider, I think Suzanne may have talked about, something in the special permit that if you have a manufacturing or cultivation license that you can't do retail. That also may be a way to get to the same result.
Yeah.
I think I like the thought process. I want to kind of think through the unintended consequences of, like, if they covenant, does that run with the land? Could they just sell it to somebody else who could do it?
Right.
Also, thinking ahead, if we come up with something that we like, to Peter's point, and we go through all the process, kind of want it to pass, then people may have concerns about that. And I know that may be something that we hear too, to kind of wait and
It
hear.
might be confusing. I mean,
Yeah, so I think that's a real good idea to kind of think about and mull over.
Again, I
Yeah.
think we're
It's a
okay
good
with the
idea.
concept,
Yeah.
but it's some
Yeah.
tuning on the edges. Would you agree?
So let
with-
me,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
The concept,
but
yeah.
let me ask a question, and it's to Eton's point earlier, and this is on the retail piece.
Yeah.
Your point earlier to the public good
Mhm.
versus black market.
Mhm.
What's your sense, for the sake of discussion?
Yeah.
That's a public good, I get it. But my understanding is that towns all around us are flat prohibiting.
I think Methuen did, and I think others have. Right,
Yeah.
my concern.
So let's say
Yeah.
that trend continues.
Mhm.
How do we balance, the public good theory, which I agree with, but we're the only place in the neighborhood where you can come and buy. And
successful business.
that's one outcome, yes. That is
So-
one outcome.
We do get we do economically, if that actually happened, we do have the option for a 3% tax, the local option tax, which
Yeah.
goes to here. But to answer the question, I think that's exactly my concern, is that if we're one of the towns that says, yeah, not here, you can do it somewhere else, and everyone does that, that contributes. Someone's got to stand up and say, people of the voters of the Commonwealth said that this is legal. It's legal, people. It's legal. And so if it's legal,
Yeah, so
this is we don't ban alcohol, we don't ban package stores.
I'm reminded of the tragedy of the Commons.
Yeah.
There'll be no grass left here, but the principle's good. So,
Yeah, I think,
I
I don't see a compelling reason to ban them. That's-
The principle, I
Yeah.
get it, but, and the business opportunity I get, and the revenue opportunity I get, but I think there's also a cost.
There, yeah.
And I think it is much easier for us to ledger some of the opportunities than it is for us to ledger the cost. And by the cost, I mean potential cost to the community in terms of, if we're the island where you can, and, what do we measure? We measure the things we can measure. And we don't measure the things that are hard to measure. Doesn't mean they're not there, just we only measure the things we can measure. So the 3%, we got that, we can measure that. So, I don't know, I'm agreeing with the public good.
Right, no, I get what you're saying.
But,
You also don't necessarily want to be the first ones to do anything, it's kind of scary. But at the same time, if I don't think that North Andover, if we allow 2 marijuana retail shops, is gonna be this haven of people coming in.
My understanding was that, again, and I may be totally wrong, but it felt to me like the retail thing was a little bit similar to the adult entertainment, that when the smoke cleared, you could not ban them outright. So you had to
Now
structure.
you can.
you-
So because we're a town, again, not getting into the constitutionality of the new law, which I think is unconstitutional, but not getting into that, the new law does say that since North Andover voted no, we can pass a bylaw that says any or all of these particular uses, now retail is the most controversial, can be banned by a bylaw with the town meeting.
Yeah.
In other places where there was a yes vote, they would actually have to go to have an election, have a voter to
Election,
voter.
okay, yeah.
So even then, that could. but it would have to be a vote of the voters. So
Okay.
to your point, Peter, I don't think it'll be everywhere around us, because there are some towns that voted yes over Merrimack Valley was one of the kind of core no places.
Which is kind of my point. that
Yeah.
It is one of the core
It
places.
is, it was like the Merrimack Valley, the
Yeah.
western suburbs,
Yeah.
and part of the Cape
Yeah.
before you got too
Yeah,
far.
it was interesting pattern, yeah.
Yeah.
But to me at least, I haven't heard a compelling reason why we should ban a retail marijuana for people over 21. We don't ban tobacco smoke, we don't ban alcohol, and frankly nothing I'm interested in, but I don't see the benefit, and I know, so that's at least my perspective.
Yeah.
And I think it is a good question of harm versus good. I think
Yeah.
good outweighs the harm, but it's to be determined.
Well, and I acknowledge the good theory, but I also just caution
Definitely.
what is easy to measure and what's hard to measure.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think this is a good discussion, and I think you have that sort of context and overall direction, because I think we're kind of like the model of an overlay is the one we want to do, and it's just a question of how we tweak it around the edges. I wanted to come back to, and you said something really interesting about the Osgood and, the need to keep it. And I had been sort of trending in the direction that this is so completely different than that, it may be time to give it up. But you actually bring up an interesting point, about Amazon, but just even broader than Amazon. And I mean, I don't know, what does everybody think about that?
Can I ask, is that an overlay, or is that?
It's a 40R district, so
Okay.
it is an overlay.
So can these things coexist?
Well, that's the spreadsheet I handed out last time. We have copies again. So the kind of how we looked at it internally is, would there be competing uses or conflicting uses if you were to leave it all in place? So the underlying, the overlay and marijuana uses.
Right, but I mean,
A lot of the residential, the mixed use allow for housing.
okay, but can you not have housing and a marijuana?
I don't know, just say, do you consider that competing? So we were
Right.
looking at maps with a 1,000-foot buffer zone.
Because we
So-
generally don't want these in residential, but if
Right.
we're just creating, so I agree, I don't really want a cultivation facility in the middle of a neighborhood. But there's not a neighborhood there now, right?
Right, but the zoning allows for it. That's
Right, so I guess if it allows, I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud, if it allows for it and someone wanted to build it, and there was a marijuana facility, then someone wanted to build it. And it's not there now. To me, so like one of the suggestions that I have for the bylaw is that it should, where we talk about 500 feet from certain places, it should be from existing,
Yeah.
not from future.
And I think the statute clarified that this time, so it's an existing school.
Right.
Needs to be 500 feet.
You can't have something that's built and then a school comes in and then says you have to get out,
Right.
That wouldn't make sense.
I mean, arguably, the issue is a little bit moot if you went down the path of the marijuana, because I doubt very much if you went down the path, we'd ever put residential in large, like a place like in Linfield there, and for the commercial component of it. But, so you could make that argument, I think, that it would take care of itself. But there's also another factor that we have to consider is that after a very long struggle, North Andover has gotten close to 10% on its affordable housing, and that if you leave the Osgood open, you have the potential to, go to 15 or 20%, and which could put an enormous amount of pressure on all the resources of the community. I think that's part of the thinking why we may want to get rid of it. Again, I haven't really thought about that, but I think that's one of the arguments about getting rid of it.
I guess part of my comment before too was I'm not fully clear on how all of the Osgood will relate or how it works, and I guess my bigger point is really if they're still pursuing this Amazon thing on a separate track, which I I understand they are. I just wouldn't want to disturb anything that would throw a wrench in the ability, should this not go through, should something happen to this. I don't want to put us in a position where we now make it harder for some business, whether it's Amazon or something else, to go into that space later. So that's, and I don't know if that's good, if that comes away, if the other commercial aspects of that area sort of go away or are harder to put in, and that's probably maybe something I can have a conversation with Gina or Rebecca about, but that's my bigger concern there, is that we don't, we're so singularly focused on this one potential project. Let's leave the door open for there to be something else should this not, for some reason, pass or go through or happen.
Yeah, I fully agree with Jen. Like, so in a great confluence of events where this bylaw passes and then it's moving towards this, and then Amazon comes knocking and says we want to do this, then I think you'd want to give the developer the opportunity to choose. We would recommend you choose the Amazon, but so I agree. So I think it would be helpful to have something either from planning or from legal, or saying how we could do that, how we could leave options on the table, what's the best way to do that.
I mean, from a bylaw point of view, we don't want to be in a position where the two are in conflict.
Right.
So, and I don't know if town council has an opinion about that, or is it more just public policy considerations?
Or could you put some kind of sunset provision in the bylaw that says, if a special permit is granted for the marijuana facility, then, like, let's say within a year or so, the Osgood
So that was the track I was on, if some type of tying the use of marijuana, if it was either approved at town meeting or a special permit was granted, then maybe the other one sunsets. Remind me on the moratorium on housing right now, is that 2 years?
Yeah.
On
so
2 years from the summer, right? Okay, so this coming May and one more May. There's a moratorium put on the housing component of the Osgood. They've already agreed to that.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
all this is worked out, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll talk to council about that, linking the two.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
That's I like that.
Yeah, to have a contingency in there, yeah.
We needed a long way through these questions, I would say, and so now I have a different opinion of moving towards kind of the detail. I think the dimensional one is really, that's kind of a working group, sitting down, looking at the options for dimensions based on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, as I look at it, there's a couple of, you're gonna have to cross, if you think about it, there's an interesting dimensional element to the Osgood property because it's of a larger scale than what you normally have. And also, normally in a zoning district, what you say is the minimum lot size. You're dealing with minimums.
Yeah.
In this case, you might be dealing with maximums, which is a lot different, actually, if you think about it. But in a sense, the maximum is higher. So, I mean, one of the questions we would have to ask is, do we cap the maximum size even for this facility? Or do we just say we allow the use and we leave it open?
Yep.
I think that's one of the calls we have to make, you know.
I think, so to that end, it would be, I mean, we've been through the building and stuff like that, but I would be curious if there is, did we ever get the specs on how much build-out there's going to be, at least in the current plans? Or is it gonna be just the current building as it is? Were you guys planning to build more?
I mean, does it, sure, like, does 1 million square feet have the potential to go to 1.5 million?
Right.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, if things were working and it were profitable and beneficial to everybody and weren't causing problems, sure, I think once you have research and development, and if this comes and plays to fruition as it's anticipated, I think, knock on wood, we'll be here in 3 years saying the building's full, and we have MIT and Harvard that want to be here, and we have Phillips or GT or Sylvania, and they want to build a building on the 35-acre parcel, and they want to be on this campus, and we're going to be knocking on the door asking you if we can do it again. I would say at a minimum, we want to use every inch of every building we have today, because I think once you take one cannabis use and put it in the building, you have made it a cannabis campus. I mean, I think that would be our view of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that kind of goes in line with what we're saying in terms of linking a cannabis site to possibly a repeal of the Osgood.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Mr. Preston said was appropriate. I think if you put a moratorium with a sunset that's 2 town meetings away, so what we did is we put a voluntary use restriction on the property for 2 town meetings to prohibit us from developing residential within the 40R overlay until such time as the earlier of the master planning was completed or the town went through 2 town meetings, and that would give the town 2 opportunities to, at an annual town meeting, discuss, consider, modify, amend, or repeal the 40R based on the master planning process. So effectively, if you put in a provision that stated that once a cannabis special permit issued, that either at 2 town meetings out, or you just put in a sunset period that the 40R goes away, I think in all likelihood that's a reasonable solution to the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. The one other thing that I'll say is, when you get into the dimensional requirements, you get into a lot of things and you'd have to think through. But also, I think it's also sort of what I'm going to say a little bit, some of the rules and regulations about what's the level of detail, specificity of what they have to provide. I mean, I think we have a lot of that, but we'll probably want to continue to go through that in a little bit more detail. I think based on what we've learned already about the important considerations, so.
A few meetings ago, we published kind of Washington State's progression, and their dimensional criteria changed quite a bit as, you know, they started experiencing these uses in terms of odor and things like that, so the dimensional requirements did change. And I thought that was a really good track of, you know, the history and where they got to. And lot size was different, whether it was indoor versus outdoor. I think it was 40 acres for an outdoor facility.
Maximum.
I'm sorry?
Maximum?
Minimum.
Minimum.
Yeah. And I have been meaning to talk to the building commissioner and get his determination whether a greenhouse is considered indoor or outdoor. I'm not quite sure how he'd rule that.
Maybe we should define it. I mean, it's like,
At one time,
building inspector, sometimes it's like rolling the dice about what the view's going to be.
But it's important, because I think the dimensional criteria for outdoors and the screening requirements and things like that are going to be different, and that's what.
So is there a question of whether proposed buildings within buildings are actually buildings? I mean, right, are those structures?
No, I think the concept we've talked about today is an indoor use.
Right.
That's what you're asking.
No, I get that,
Okay.
but I'm just wondering out loud, I guess, if the individual structures are considered structures, you know? So,
Yeah.
that, for somebody else, it's my
Yep.
point, but,
So,
By the way, this reminded me, at today's seminar, they also, who was it who mentioned the New York Times Magazine article from a week ago on the experiences in Oregon, which I haven't yet read.
I skimmed through it, so that was, his last name was Hall, from Anderson Krieger, I think, so he was a land use attorney. So.
just wanted to say something about, Peter, your point earlier about transparency. I think, you know, one of the and requirements versus what we actually do. So like the requirement of publication is, you know, publishing in the Eagle Tribune for when we, you know, are going to have I really think we should strive to do a lot more. That when we do have a potential bylaw crafted, that we really get out, that it gets out on social media, that we're going to have these hearings, it's going to be discussed, and it gets out in multiple occasions, sort of like we're doing with the master plan. Because, like you said, the last thing we want is someone coming to town meeting or something. Oh, I didn't even hear. Why is this back on? You know, which is a question I've already seen raised. So I think that's a great point.
So
I think we need to do our best to.
Yes, I agree that I think we go beyond the bar, and
Yes.
just to tell you that this is informed with an experience. With you may have heard of the controversy with the LNG terminal in Boston, you know, post 9/11 LNG terminals. So I was the Coast Guard captain of the port for Connecticut and Long Island and the approaches to New York, and there was a proposal to build a new LNG terminal floating on Long Island Sound on a barge 1,200 feet long, 4 football fields, to unload tankers with LNG regasified pipeline. It was enormously controversial. And so my office was responsible for, under the FERC, doing the public assessment of safety and security. And we spent a year. And I have to tell you, whenever FERC or someone else would say, well, we're going to have one public hearing in Long Island and one in Connecticut, my answer was no way. We're going to do 2, we're going to do 4. And as you get into those type of controversial issues, and I know this is not LNG, but it's controversial for some people, being able to rely on a clear path of consistent openness, transparency, and what you're saying, a thoroughness, yields dividends. Really does.
You never built the thing, right?
We did not build the thing.
Yeah.
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 In part because the LNG market changed.
Yeah.
You know, but that was quite an experience, and I'm a big fan of openness. So that's where my sort of passion on this comes from, because I've been in the middle of that.
So, any other thing? I think this has been a good discussion, and I think we have, we're pretty much, I think, pinned down on the framework at this point.
I think, yeah, I think you covered 4 out of 5. I think it leaves the dimensional.
So,
And I know you're still thinking about Holt Road versus retail areas, but I think it was good discussion.
So, yeah. Makes me feel better, because then once you've got the broad infrastructure in place, then you can start filling in all the details. Yeah.
And I think the biggest gap right now is in that dimensional piece. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the other topics are covered, whether, you want to make recommendations to change those, that's probably.
I mean, just on the dimensional piece, to me, it seems like it's, I'm not sure setting a maximum just as part of the bylaw is a good idea, but having dimension considered as part of the special permit.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of leaning to the thing is we don't need to put a cap on, we just,
If it's too big, then we don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the special
Right.
permit process is about,
Exactly.
so you can deal with it that way. I mean, I think some of the physical dimensional requirements, you can see what's in IT, you can see what's there already. I mean, given that we're only gonna do 1 or 2 of these, and it's gonna be in an existing site, again, it's largely moot, because you're gonna deal with what's already there. But
I mean, yeah, I think you'd want to have some setbacks. I mean, 'cause in my head, I'm picturing what's there now. You wouldn't want these building going right up to the street.
Right up to, that's what I mean. So I think you
Right.
could probably live with some combination of what's already in I-2,
Right.
and then maybe what all the way
Right.
sits there in the field, I mean, just some common sense would probably make that work okay, yeah.
We've talked about this before, and I think had a lot of good thoughts about it, but I continue to think that when we look at lessons learned elsewhere in the country, my impression has been that many of the problem issues could be addressed by this concept of building within a building.
Yeah.
Because it gives you a closed-loop environment that you would not be able to really ensure if you're relying on just the skin of the building. When we talked about it before, we also talked about, but if technology changes and you don't want to sort of tie yourself down, the discussion of dimensional requirements just triggers this thought again. We'd be in a whole different place if downstream we were to hear, we're not going to do the building within the building anymore. For me, it would be like, whoa, wait a minute. Much of the decision-making to that point was based on that concept because of how it contains things. It contains water consumption, it contains the odor issues, huge issues elsewhere.
So would you
Security
consider that
issues.
like a design guideline?
Uh,
that-
I
that's
honestly
the-
don't know what the
yeah.
mechanism
No, I
is. I'm
think
throwing
that's-
it out for,
That's a little bit where you have, I use the term freely rules and regulations of, the planning board has rules and regulations related to building subdivisions in terms of the standards that a developer has to follow. I almost feel like it's a combination of the submittal requirements and some of those rules and regulations. Again, and, to some degree, you can't be as comprehensive here as with planning board rules and regulations because they have 100 years' worth of experience. In that case, this is new, but I think it's a little bit simpler is certain design standards you bake in there and you have to demonstrate that you meet them as part of your application.
Right, so,
Yeah.
and I think that's touched on, but
Yeah.
maybe should be refined as part of the working group, so like in the proposed ordinance, it talks about water consumption, security measures, odor, and I think those should all be spelled out, that you need to address those, but with maybe something added saying it's gotta be either up to a guidelines established or concurred by the planning board, or, it's gotta be part of your special permit that you've shown us that odor control is met, water control is met, electrical, that's all met. And I agree with Peter that it's not, what we have now seems to be going down that road. If it was something different, then you'd have to analyze it in a very different way. So I think we're getting there with what we have. But it needs to, I think, some refinement as to how we make sure that if a special permit comes before that and you're not satisfied that odor is dealt with, that we have the ability to say no.
Okay. This is good. So I think for our next meeting, what I'd like to be able to do is take these principles and kind of tighten them up a little bit, because I feel like we're at the point where we can make some real traction in terms of the specific bylaw, and we ought to just make sure, I think those concepts are embedded, and then maybe leave out, kind of like question marks for the areas that we need to focus in a little bit more. But I think we can start getting to the point fairly soon, maybe our next meeting where we start looking at the detail of it a little bit more and the structure of it a little bit more.
And like I said, at your next hearing, we will have at least a sense of the Board of Selectmen and what they're feeling in terms of uses.
The selectmen.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're talking about it on Monday, the 16th,
Yeah.
and you meet on the 17th.
Okay.
So,
I had a question just about just a practice. So it says that step one, the zoning amendment is submitted to the Board of Selectmen.
yeah.
In the past, when it's been a amendment from the planning board, does someone go and talk about it with them, or do we give them any input, or is it just here?
Yeah, I mean, we
discuss
usually
how to-
go, generally, most of the ones we do are not a big
They're
deal.
pretty-
And so we just propose them and they accept them and,
I think the last significant was the mill
yeah.
area, when we created the historic mill area as a sub-district of the downtown overlay. I did a presentation to the
Okay.
planning board, to the Board of Selectmen for that one. But last year's were map amendments and whatnot, and I just covered them with the town manager, and I think he presented it. But they do have a meeting to discuss them.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that anybody wants to go to the meeting on the 16th, it's probably not a bad idea. I mean,
I think,
you're a glutton for punishment. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this one may warrant it. It was.
Not that going to the selectmen is the glutton for punishment, but 2 nights in a row is.
Well,
I would clarify
Oh,
that.
yeah.
I think they do a great job, but I think it may be helpful, at least for them to have a sense of what we're thinking, in the grand
Yeah, I
scheme.
mean, I'm inclined if I can afford the time to go, because I do want them to realize we're really putting a lot of thought and effort
Right.
into it, and it's not a simple thing to do. So, okay, great. Good, excellent. So, Jean, now you can talk about the master
I
plan.
don't have a lot to say about the master plan, but I do have the public forum flyer that hopefully everybody's
Yeah.
seen, because it has hit social media and the website. It's been handed out at the farmer's market, it was handed out at the fall festival. So this is the big deal, and really for the next 2 weeks, it's all about communicating this. So we meet Thursday night. The comments back from the existing condition plan is due on Friday, so if anybody has any comments on that, please send them to me. So Thursday night's meeting will really be the committee themselves submitting their comments and just discussing the public engagement strategy for that November 2nd hearing. So, on November 7th, RKG is going to come and give you an update of the public forum and the process and the schedule, as well as MVPC will speak to the regional housing plan as well.
Okay.
So that's in existing condition draft right now. I haven't sent that out yet. I've asked for a couple of minor changes. And then the second workshop for the housing plan is scheduled on November 15th. And that's when we get the existing conditions and again, start talking about maybe strategy, zoning, things like that, that can address the needs.
Yeah.
So, but they will both be here on November 7th, so.
Good, excellent. Great. Anything else anybody wants to bring up?
Yes,
Yes.
the lake cleanup.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Peter.
Saturday, October 21st, meeting at 9:30 at the Stevens Pond Swim Beach until 11:30. Rolling Ridge is participating, the country club is participating, high school volunteers, DPW, conservation, planning, and donuts.
Do we have Edgewood in the mix?
Have not heard from Edgewood. It'd be great to.
Yeah, because
reach
they
out.
were involved last year.
They were involved last
Yeah.
year.
We'll have to reach out to them. I don't think we did.
I don't think we have yet.
Brooks is that, we moved it up this year to try to get before the leaves drop.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it coincided with Brooks' Parents' Weekend, so they're gonna pick an alternative day, but they're
We
still
tried to
gonna
get
do
the
a
parents
showing.
to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't buy into it.
Say the 18th?
Yeah, 21st.
21st.
Do people need to bring anything?
DPW provides gloves and grabber hooky things, and also we have coffee and donuts.
Yeah.
And is it kid family friendly?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
They walk the shoreline,
Yeah.
so just, you
And,
have to be with your children
My kids will
as
not
you walk
stay
it.
on the shoreline.
Either walking shoreline, or if you have a boat permit, do it by boat.
Swimming permit.
No, no.
Can they bring their dogs, Peter? Yeah, so it's been a really good turnout, but this year we used to get Merrimack on Merrimack Gives Back Day. But by moving that forward, they're not gonna be available, so we are hoping to get enough hands. It's a
Yeah.
big area to cover, but historically it's gone really well.
Yeah, good. Excellent, excellent. This is great. It really is a great event. Yeah, to make it, yeah. Okay, somebody want to approve the September 19th minutes?
Make a
Motion.
motion to approve the September 19th planning board minutes.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yes, Mr. Leary.
Sorry to stand up again. Just as a follow-up on the working group question, I think you were going to save that till after the end of the meeting, or after the last
Yeah, I think we
discussion.
want to
Is that
do
still
it,
an option?
but I think what we'd like to maybe is to wait until after the next meeting. I think we're getting pretty close. Till they've written down something that's the structure and framework, and then we'll start to work the details, because they need to have I think this discussion will be informative to that, so,
Thank you very much.
yeah. Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you.